Chapter 68 Part 2. Chapter 68. To Reap What One Has Sown Part 2. Stepping into the room, a sweet smell lingered at his nose. He was stunned to see the cloud of smoke all over the place, making him unable to see clearly. He spoke anxiously, "Beauty, where are you?" "Eldest young Master Li, you're scaring Sewer," a gentle voice echoed in his ear. Li Yang's heart was shaken. Jiang Susu's beautiful face floated before his eyes. He was so giddy with joy that he promptly embraced her. "Sewer's being so proactive, it's really making me feel moved." The girl in red regarded him calmly. Li Yang strived to open his eyes wider, but her face was still fuzzy. Yet he didn't care. He just wanted to get close to her and kiss her fiercely. Unexpectedly, the girl suddenly laughed. "Eldest young Master Li, Sewer has a gift for you." When Li Yang heard this, he felt that even though he had met countless people, he had never encountered such an interesting woman. Obviously, she looked like a fairy, but took the initiative to act like a slut. His interest was piqued. "What kind of gift?" The girl whispered, "The gift is, go to hell." As soon as she said this, she ruthlessly smashed him with a flower vase that was tucked behind her back. Li Yang did not expect the beauty to suddenly become a life-stealing Azura. Thus, taken by surprise, he was heavily wounded with blood gushing out immediately from his head. His body swayed and fell down. Zhang Ruan looked at Li Yang lying sprawled on the ground with a cold smile on her lips. She crouched down, fiddled with the broken china pieces, and suddenly softly smiled. Li Dong and Li Yang were the most disgusting people. This father and son pair committed inappropriate and illicit acts in the Grand Counselor's fu. This was widely known to everyone of all ranks in society. Reputation was not the most important thing in dealing with such a brazen person. Before she died in her last life, she only knew that Li Dong had violated pair, but she had no idea if Li Yang also had a share in it. Even if it was not so, the father's debt must be repaid by the son. It was not too much. She slapped the piece of china on Li Yang's face. "Young Master Li, I gave you a gift. Isn't it your turn to return the favor?" A short time later, Zhang Ruan left the room. Just as she reached Su Exine Yuan's gate, she heard a young manservant's voice. "Young Master. Where are you, young Master?" It was the manservant at Li Yang's side. Zhang Ruan paused. It was too late to hide. Her mind kept turning, but she still couldn't come up with a solution. Then, all of a sudden she heard the young manservant screaming in shock. And then there was nothing. After hesitating for a few moments, Zhang Ruan walked out of the gate and saw the young manservant lying face down a few steps away from the gate. It seemed as though he had fallen down and fainted. Zhang Ruan frowned. She looked around. Seeing no one, she went around the unconscious manservant and left in a perfectly composed manner. Up in a tree, a young man in black played with the stones in his hand. His long eyelashes drooped, covering his contemplative eyes. He had come to the Jiangfu to investigate Xian Li's matters, but came across an unexpected scene. It seemed that the eldest young miss of the Jiangfu and the eldest young Master Li had old scores to settle. It was very shocking to see the ruthless way she acted against her enemy. Xu Xiang had been waiting in the garden but then walked towards Su Exine Yuan. While still halfway, she saw Lu Zhu running over in a panic. Xu Xiang asked hurriedly, "What's going on? You look so anxious, did something happen?" "No, nothing." Lu Zhu masked her expression. "Go back to Wanju first. I still have some things to do." After saying this, she left in haste. Seeing this, Xu Xiang's heart was set. After some thought, she went in the other direction. Jiang Quan and Li Dong had finished talking about the official matters, so they casually strolled around the Jiangfu, talking about the marriage between the two families. Although Li Dong was lecherous, he was also cunning like an old fox. He was being vague with his words. Xia Yan, keeping them company, sneaked in a few words, but Li Dong's attitude was obscure, saying it depended on Li Yang's wishes. As they walked, they got closer and closer to Su Exine Yuan. At this exact moment, suddenly a pretty servant girl rushed out from the other direction, looking frightened. When she caught sight of Xia Yan, it was as if she had seen her savior. She knelt down and cried, "Please help Furin. Please help my eldest miss." After she spoke, she looked up and was stunned as if just now realizing that Li Dong was present. Xia Yan looked at the servant girl in surprise, her brows knitted. What does this mean? What happened to Ruaner? The servant girl seemed frightened, looking submissive and not daring to speak. Xia Yan was more and more impatient. What on earth has happened? As soon as these words were uttered, a woman's scream from within Su Xian Yuan was heard. The cry was so shrill that everyone present couldn't help but shiver. Xia Yan was stunned. She didn't speak anymore and rushed quickly to Su Xian Yuan. Lin Lang followed her closely. When they reached Su Xian Yuan, it was extremely quiet. There was no one in the courtyard. Xia Yan went to the small guest room first. The room was tranquil. The teapot and the teacups on the table were in the same position as before, undisturbed. Both Lin Lang and Xia Yan stared blankly, only to hear another scream. This time it was loud and clear, coming from Jiang Susu's bedroom. For a second, Xia Yan could not help wonder why the location had changed to Jiang Susu's room. But then, a foreboding feeling rose inside her heart. She pushed Lin Lang, who stood in front of her, away and rushed into Jiang Susu's room. As soon as she entered the room, she smelled the strong and nauseating stench of blood. Xia Yan's eyes jumped at the startling sight of blood on the ground. A sound of weeping reached Xia Yan's ears, making her feel as if struck by lightning. She took a few steps forward. Wasn't the one standing in the room crying Jiang Susu? Li Yang's head was covered with blood at Jiang Susu's feet. His former appearance couldn't be seen at all. Meanwhile her eyes were tightly shut, dreading the imminent disaster, knowing that there was no silver lining in the clouds that could save her. No dash. Xia Yan's eyes widened. The sound of footsteps came from behind the door. It was already too late to stop them. She heard Zhang Quan's voice. What happened? The voice stopped abruptly, and then there was a scream. My son! Li Dong stared with wide eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He rushed to Li Yang's side and shook him. Son, wake up! Li Yang seemed to be unconscious. Li Dong lowered his head and looked down at Li Yang's lower body. The fine silk robe was bloodstained from his waist down. His gaze was fixed on the badly mangled thing nearby. Then he let out a torturous howl. Whoever saw his own son castrated wouldn't be indifferent. Li Dong looked up again, his eyes were scarlet. Zhang Quan, I want you to pay with a life. Not me, not me. Jiang Susu was trembling with fear and tears were all over her face. He was already like this when I entered the room. Not me, it really wasn't me. But no one could believe her words as the scene in front of their eyes unfolded. The most powerful hypothesis being that Li Yang was overcome with lust and wanted to commit an immoral act against Jiang Susu, who then broke his head with a vase and castrated him in anger. Xia Yan defended her. No, it couldn't be Su'er. She is timid and wouldn't treat eldest young Master Li like this. Minister Li, don't panic. The assassin must still be hiding inside the courtyard. Where is Ruaner? Su'er, you are not with Ruaner. Where is Ruaner? She thought it must have been Zhang Ruan's act of shifting the blame, and Zhang Ruan probably hadn't left the courtyard yet. Li Dong raised his head. However, before he could speak, he heard a soft female voice outside. Father, mother, what has happened? Why is everyone in second sister's room? Xia Yan's whole body immediately stiffened when she saw Zhang Ruan standing at the gate of the courtyard. She was wearing red from head to toe, sultry like fire. Today she'd even put on some powder. She looked extremely beautiful. By comparison, Jiang Susu, who was in a teary mess, cut a sorry figure. Ruaner, weren't you picking bolts of satin with Su'er in the room? Why did you go out? Xia Yan asked eagerly. I waited for second sister, but she was late. I thought it would be better to take the initiative to find her, but unexpectedly I couldn't. Zhang Ruan explained, so I asked Lu Zhu to pick some red plum flowers in the garden with me, thinking that they would look good in the vase. As she spoke, in her raised hands, there were indeed a few branches of plum flowers. Xia Yan was paralyzed on the ground. Zhang Quan's forehead throbbed painfully. Looking at Li Yang unconscious on the ground, a trace of cruelty flashed across Li Dong's face. He yelled, "Slut, pay back my son with your life." Before people could see his movements clearly, a sharp piece of broken china was already in his hand. Jiang Susu jumped back in fear. Li Dong was fat and not particularly nimble. Jiang Susu was able to dodge, but she felt a scorching pain on her right cheek. When she reached out to touch it, her hand was soaked with blood. Jian Quan shouted, "Impudent!" The courtyard's guard made every effort to pull Li Dong away. Jiang Susu collapsed while covering her face and burst into tears. Looking at Jiang Susu's bloody face, Xia Yan's heart was in pain and she immediately fainted. "Call the doctor," Jiang Quan said worriedly. Li Dong also dispatched people to carry Li Yang. "Go back to the Fu immediately." Before leaving, he looked at Jiang Quan maliciously. "I will not give up this matter. Jiang Quan, I will make you pay the price." After Li Dong's party left, Jiang Quan rubbed his forehead. Because of concerns and worries about Jiang Susu and Xia Yan, he left for Yanhua Yuan in a hurry. For a while, Su Xian Yuan was restored to its former desolation. Lu Zhu stood silently at Zhang Ruan's side. Amid the bloodstained ground, Zhang Ruan smiled and said softly, "Xu Xiang, won't you come in?" Xu Xiang's face was deathly pale. She seemed to have sensed the devil incarnate in Zhang Ruan. Earlier, she thought that the matter was finished when Lu Zhu had that look of worry, so she hurriedly reported back to Xia Yan. Who could have known that it would be Jiang Susu who fell into the trap? It was too much to call all of this a coincidence. "You'll remember the road to Su Xian Yuan now, and never forget it in your lifetime." Zhang Ruan smiled at her. "Right." Lu Zhu had a hard-to-conceal look of contempt in her eyes. Xu Xiang's back was covered with cold sweat. She knew that Xia Yan would not let her off lightly this time. The girl in red, however, seemed to be in harmony with the blood-stained ground. Her expression showed no signs of panic. With an indifferent smile, she turned around and left. This day was bound to be a momentous one for the capital's Zhang family. In a few short days, Zhang Chao's finger was cut off, Jiang Susu was disfigured, Xia Yan fainted from anger, and old Zhang Madam was bedridden. Such a big Jiang Fu, it was unknown when it started showing signs of collapse. So subtle, but the rotten things were deep-rooted. One day, they broke through the ground and began to nibble away at this magnificent Fu. Zhang Ruan sat at the table drinking tea. A little of the freshly made 100 flowers honey, sent from Zhuangzi, was allocated to each courtyard. To it were added a few petals of the freshly picked red plum flowers from the yard. This simple flower tea had a special taste when drunk. That afternoon, the mishap took place, and in the evening Zhang Dan came to see Zhang Ruan. She looked at Zhang Ruan and asked anxiously, "Jejia, I was in the courtyard today and didn't go out at all. I heard that you were on the scene. Is it true that second sister smashed eldest young Master Li's head?" Zhang Ruan smiled at her. "Oh, second sister's news traveled swiftly. But you don't seem to believe it?" No. Zhang Dan quickly waved her hand. "It's just that second sister has always been gentle. I just didn't expect that she would have the courage to hurt eldest young Master Li." As she spoke, she probed Zhang Ruan's expression. "Rabbits will bite when they are cornered." Zhang Ruan spoke in a slow and deliberate tone. "People who normally look docile also have a fierce side, but we can't see it." Zhang Dan paused and then smiled. "What Jejia said is true." After talking for a while, Zhang Dan timidly said goodbye and left. Lian Xiao accompanied Zhang Dan to the courtyard's gate. When she came back, she remarked, "Fourth Miss is really odd. Foreign does not treat her very well, yet she is anxiously inquiring about second Mississippi." She shook her head. Wasn't she being excessively kind? Zhang Ruan smiled but kept silent. She was vague about Zhang Dan's feelings. She only knew that since the death of Third Nyang, Zhang Dan was raised at Zhao Mei's side. At that time, Zhang Dan was not as cowardly as she was now. Although she was somewhat timid, she was always fawning over people and showing off her cleverness. Zhao Mei also liked her very much. Although sometimes Zhang Ruan was annoyed with Zhang Dan striving for favors. Ultimately, she felt pity for her after losing her mother, and understood her rush to fall all over others. But Zhang Xianji, who had always been gentle, didn't like Zhang Dan very much. Although he didn't show it, he always had a kind of polite alienation. In the last life, Zhang Dan seemed to have been married out as a noble son's concubine. She was a daughter born from a concubine, never mind wishing to be the legal wife of a family of better standing. Also, she was also uncertain about the subsequent events, and didn't know whether Zhang Dan had contributed in making her the enchantress who brought calamity to the country. While they were still conversing, She heard someone talking outside. Lu Zhu pushed the door and entered. She stuck her lip out and said, "Xu Xiang came back just now. I saw that her face was covered with slap marks and she was unsteady on her feet. Her face was really pale." Zhang Ruan smiled. Today, Xu Xiang had messed up so greatly, Xia Yan wouldn't let her go easily. However, she was still the chess piece placed in Ruanju, so Xia Yan was reluctant to kill her for the time being and spared her life. Miss Baiji asked, "This servant doesn't understand one thing. That time Furen gave you 4 servant girls. Why do you treat this Xu Xiang differently? You aren't this careful toward the others." "Perhaps I have an old score to settle with her," Zhang Ruan whispered. Lu Zhu, besides the Li family's father and son, was there anyone else who visited the Fu today? This servant asked many people. There was indeed no other visitor. Lu Zhu answered, "Miss, was there a problem?" Zhang Ruan shook her head. Li Yang's manservant wouldn't faint without any reason. If it wasn't an outsider, it could only be someone inside the Fu helping her in secret. But that also meant that what she did today was discovered by another. The man helped her, but that didn't necessarily mean that he was a friend and not a foe. Who on earth was he? Zhang Ruan pondered. In Yanhua Yuan, Xia Yan swept the one remaining celadone teacup off the table until it smashed into pieces. The surrounding servant girls held their breath. Lin Lang came forward to advise. "Furen, don't be angry. It will harm your body." Celadone, a term for pottery denoting both wares glazed in the jade-green celadone color, also known as greenware, and a type of transparent glaze, often with small cracks, that was first used on greenware, but later used on other porcelains. Celadone originated in China, though the term is purely European, and notable kilns such as the Longquan kiln in Zhejiang province are renowned for their celadone glazes. Celadone wares were highly regarded by the Chinese imperial court. The similarity of the color to jade, traditionally the most highly valued material in China, was a large part of its attraction. Thwack! Xia Yan slapped her with the back of the hand. Immediately, 5 obvious finger marks showed up on Lin Lang's face. She didn't dare to move. The other servant girls around, seeing the most favored Lin Lang being slapped, stayed in place motionless. Xia Yan was about to explode in anger. Remembering the last words of the physician who treated Jiang Su, she felt even more emotional. "Your daughter has a deep wound and lost too much blood. She is still all right now, but I'm afraid it will leave scars later." Jiang Su's devastatingly beautiful face was now ruined. How could she marry into a wealthy and noble family in the future? She hated Li Yang for hanging between life and death in Jiang Su's boudoir. She hated Li Dong too for scratching Jiang Su's face. And she hated Zhang Ruan the most. She didn't believe that all this had nothing to do with Zhang Ruan. Obviously, it had been an infallible arrangement. As long as Zhang Ruan entered the small guest room and drank the tea on the table, Li Yang would come inside the courtyard and commit an act with Zhang Ruan. After Zhang Quan and Li Dong found them by accident and the truth came out, this matter would be over. Zhang Ruan's reputation would be ruined, so she could only enter the Li family to be a low-rank concubine. However, it never occurred to her that Zhang Ruan would not enter the guest room at all and not drink the tea. Unknowingly, Li Yang collapsed in Jiang Su's room just when Jiang Su returned to the room. Now she was afraid that Li Dong fiercely hated Jiang Su. Even if she hated Li Dong just as much, Li Yang was badly injured and castrated in the Jiangfu. She had no idea what kind of method Li Dong would use to retaliate. At the thought of it, Xia Yan felt a lingering fear. "No, I have to think of a way." Xia Yan walked around the room a few times, made up her mind, then went to her desk, and had Lin Lang grind some ink. "I'm going to write to my father and ask him to come up with an idea." At the same time, Zhang Quan rubbed his forehead in the study. In a mere few days, several threads of white hair began to grow at his temples. His favorite son and daughter were suffering from this kind of disaster. He was seized with anger, but the other side was Li Dong, 8th prince's man. Hong Ying stood behind him, a pair of lily-white hands pressing his scalp gently while telling him tenderly, "Laoi, be at ease. Second young lady and second young master will get better." Zhang Quan's eyes drooped dejectedly. His eyes that were always high-spirited were now filled with sorrow. The son and daughter that he had the most pride in were now bedridden and perhaps both would be disabled. He recalled Xia Yan's words. With the only D son and D daughter in the Fu being like this now, who would inherit Zhongfu in the future? I, Zhang Quan, have fallen to this extent. I was unable to protect my children. Hong Ying's gentle words were in his ears. Leoi, that's incorrect. Don't we still have eldest young master and eldest young miss? Zhang Xing and Zhang Ruan. Zhang Quan was slightly shocked. Zhang Xing had left Zhongfu many years ago, and it was unknown whether he was alive or dead. He called to mind Zhang Ruan that he saw in Su Xing Yuan today. She was a slender and elegant young girl, wearing light makeup. She had blossomed into an unparalleled beauty. Her red dress made him think of Zhao Mei when she was young. Compared to Zhao Mei, Zhang Ruan was less willful and impetuous, more sweet-tempered and vibrant. He loathed Zhao Mei from the beginning because Zhao Mei fell in love with him. Since Zhao Mei was a young lady from a wealthy and noble family, he had no alternative but to marry her. But he never loved her. Zhao Mei, a general's daughter, learned the 4 arts, zither, go, calligraphy and painting, for him. Since he didn't love Zhao Mei, he never showed any concern or care even for Zhang Xing and Zhang Ruan. Now were Zhang Chao and Zhang Susu's mishaps heaven's punishment for him. Li Dong won't leave the matter at that. Zhang Quan sighed deeply. Li Yang looks like that now. I'm afraid he will ask to marry Su'er. Hong Ying's hand stilled. Asking for marriage? If Li Yang dies, the matter rests here. But if he doesn't, with that kind of appearance, I'm afraid that no good family will consent to give their daughter to marry him in the future, Zhang Quan explained. Now he hates Su'er to the bone. If she gets married to him, she will be tortured in every possible way. Su'er will barely survive there, nor can she die. Thus she will never be happy. Is Leoi willing to break off relations with Grand Counselor Li for second young lady? Hong Ying inquired. No, Zhang Quan replied. The Jiangfu needs to ingratiate itself with His Highness, 8th Prince. But in order to accomplish that, it will be impossible to break off relations with the Li family. Then Leoi is willing to marry second young lady to the Li family? Hong Ying probed him. Oh. Su'er is my most beloved daughter. I would never send her to a living hell. Zhang Quan said. Even if Li Yang was in good condition, I would not marry Su'er to him. Not to mention that he is just a waste now. What will Leoi do? Hong Ying had a faint guess in her heart and her voice became even more gentle. I don't want to send Su'er to them. If I can compensate them with Ruaner, maybe I can pacify Li Dong and his son's anger, Zhang Quan told her. Ruaner, who is beautiful now, may look even more remarkable as she grows older. By giving them my innocent D daughter as compensation, perhaps, they will feel the Jiangfu's sincerity. Even though she had guessed at this a little bit, Hong Ying was still shocked beyond words. Unexpectedly, Zhang Quan could think of causing Zhang Ruan a lifetime's worth of misery in exchange for Zhang Susu's liberation. How could there be such a father in the world who treated his own flesh and blood so differently? Had she not heard it with her own ears, Hong Ying could never believe that these words came from Zhang Quan's mouth. She couldn't help saying, Leoi, do you know what marrying eldest young Miss off means? It would signify that Zhang Ruan becomes a tool for the Li father and son to vent their anger. Li Yang and Li Dong would transfer their hatred for Zhang Susu to Zhang Ruan. Zhang Ruan would have to live a life of humiliation. Zhang Quan didn't open his eyes. I have no other way. Ruaner, as the elder sister, should love and protect her. He spoke as if this was proper and a matter of course. Hong Ying felt a chill in her heart and reluctantly smiled. Leoi, you better wait until second young lady wakes up to make a plan. We also don't know second young Master Li's situation yet. Zhang Quan was stunned. You are right, this matter will be discussed later. Now we will wait until Su'er wakes up. You can withdraw. Hong Ying hurriedly withdrew from the room. When she got out, she still felt a lingering fear. She shuddered to think of Zhang Quan's words just now. Everyone in the capital had heard about the Li family's father and son's disgusting means. It was really chilling that Zhang Quan could propose marrying Zhang Ruan off to that family without batting an eyelid. Zhang Ruan once threw her an olive branch, but Hong Ying was always careful and did not ally herself with others easily. But she could clearly perceive that the course of events inside the Jiangfu had changed surreptitiously since Zhang Ruan returned. Eldest Zhang Miss looked gentle and pleasant, But during the mishaps that had occurred over these past few days, she was all safe and sound while the Xian Yin mother-daughter pair came to grief. Hong Ying was born in a brothel. She wasn't so naive to think that it was all due to Zhang Ruan's luck. Translated by Mazu. Chapter 69 Part 1. Chapter 69. A Marriage Alliance, Part 1. For the first time since the beginning of spring, it had rained. As the rain ran down the eaves of the roof onto the slabs in the courtyard, the gloominess of the weather seemed to be slowly descending to the earth as well. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Xia Yan had held up a spoonful of sweetened steam-curdled yogurt pudding and was bringing it closer to the young girl before her. Tongzheng Sulao. There is no proper name for this commonly seen snack in Beijing. This local street snack that is distinctive of the flavors in Beijing is commonly made with fresh milk, sweet fermented rice wine, sugar and almond slices. The steps to making this sweet dessert are similar to pudding, using methods of straining and steaming. This is made to mitigate the summer heat. I don't want to eat. Jiang Su cast her head aside. That pair of movingly beautiful eyes were filled with anger. Although medicine had been applied on the right cheek of that spotlessly white as a jade face, the long cut of flesh that had begun just from her right eye downwards had gruesomely flipped over. By sheer coincidence, her skin had been slashed open right at the blood-colored tear-shaped birthmark of hers. With one look it made her seem similar to Azura. Sewer be good. Only when you eat something will the wound heal quickly. Xia Yin gently persuaded her. With one swipe, Jiang Su flipped the porcelain bowl in Xia Yan's hands as she spoke in an agitated voice. What good will it be now, with these looks of mine that make me look like a ghost? In what way is it possible to become better? It's better for me to be dead. As she spoke to a point that made her emotionally upset, she could not help but cough twice, causing the right side of her face that had initially looked warped to appear even more frightening. Distressed, Xia Yan gently patted her back. If you say this, can it be that you are trying to make Mother pain to death over you? Sewer be at ease. Mother will definitely find the best physician who will not leave the slightest scar behind. Do you believe that I will be convinced by your words? Jiang Su looked at her with a face filled with disappointment. If not for your idea of having Shu Xiang lure in that Li Yang into Su Exenuan, then how would have matters developed to such a degree? It's all you. It's all your fault. Having spoken this last point, her gaze had become wild and her emotions were so intense that they were almost out of control. Enough! All of a sudden Xia Yan shouted in a low voice and swiftly spoke in a whisper. Are you trying to have everyone hear about this matter? Jiang Su's voice, which had become hoarse, was now mute, but still she continued to glare at her. Xia Yan's voice was unexpectedly severe. Put away that terrible look of yours. Do you believe that you can change anything by staying in such a state? If Zhang Ruan were to see you in such a manner, she might even be thrilled. If your father saw you in such a state, he would only be disappointed. If you want revenge, then restrain those tears of yours for me and listen to my words. Her strict tone startled Jiang Su for a moment, but she slowly calmed down and asked, then what should I do? Once Xia Yan saw that she was now behaving, she knew that Jiang Su had digested her words and spoke with a sigh of relief. Now that your second brother has lost a finger, this matter has become extremely suspicious. I do not know how this has happened to your second brother, but this matter between you and Liang Zhongruan is unable to shed off responsibility for it. She has actually played tricks on both you and me. I hate that I cannot peel off her skin and drink her blood. Jiang Su clenched her fists as her gaze became gloomy. She has harmed me till such a state. I cannot accept it. The Li family's power is too strong, however. No matter what, I will not send you to them. I have already written a letter to your maternal grandfather. If your maternal grandfather knew how you and your second brother were right now, Zhang Ruan's peaceful days would be numbered. Why Zifu maternal grandfather? Jiang Su's eyes were alit. Maternal grandfather will avenge me. So now you need to recuperate from your injuries properly. Xia Yan looked at her as she mildly continued, later when your wound is better, I will then arrange for you to take a trip to the Xiaofu. Xia Yan was born from the second wife of the Marquis of Yongding, Xia Cheng. At that time Xia Cheng was unknown, only a meager county lord. Thus, with Xia Yan's status, she could not marry Jiang Quan as his main wife. Who would have known that Xia Cheng's elder brother would die suddenly due to an illness a few years later, and thus, the marquis title landed on him, the Shu son's shoulders. As the tide rises, the boat floats. With this change in station and in addition, with Zhao Mei severing relations with General Zhao, Xia Yan's status became more fitting to the position of being Jiang Quan's legitimate wife. Xia Chong and Xia Yan in general were the kind of people who would defend their own despite knowing that they were in the wrong. If he knew that this pair of maternal grandchildren of his had such unforeseen events happen to them, who knew what sort of methods he would use to deal with Zhang Ruan? After speaking with Jiang Su for a while, Xia Yan then stood up and left. After she walked to the door, Xia Yan rubbed her forehead and asked, "Chower, has he awoken?" Lin Lang lowered her head in reply. Second young master woke up at noon. Only, he threw a huge tantrum once he woke up and had all of the maidservants in the residence expelled from his room. He is unwilling to see anyone. Xia Yan took a deep breath. "Let's go, I will go see him." The weather continued to be cloudy and rainy, yet the atmosphere in Ruanju remained similar to how it was in the past, leisurely and relaxed. It seemed completely unaffected by this gloomy weather. Zhang Ruan stood before the desk practicing some writing as Bai Ji was at her side, helping her to grind some ink. "Miss, this character is developing well. You are illiterate, who are you to say that it's good?" From her side, Lian Xiao remarked. Bai Ji's face flushed. After all, her mouth was not as ferocious as Lian Xiao's and so could only mumble with a lowered head. "It's because I see that it looks good." Zhang Ruan placed the brush aside. "Do you want to learn to write?" As the two of them heard that, without exception, they were both surprised and delighted as they looked at her. Lian Xiao replied, "Naturally, we would wish to. Then in a few days I will pick some simple books and you two will begin to learn how to recognize some words." Following her, being able to read would definitely be good. Generally, Lu Zhu was outside handling matters, therefore Lian Xiao and Bai Ji ought to be able to help her with some matters in the Fu as well. This servant thanks Mississippi. The two maidservants were naturally unable to contain their joy. For servant girls, being able to learn to read were things that only people of the upper echelons could do. For Zhang Ruan to allow them to learn to read, it was truly something they could not thank her enough for. "Young miss, to have Lu Zhu go out today and retrieve the banknotes that were deposited at the Sihai money shop. Why was this done?" Lian Xiao asked. Qinzhuang. The first of such an establishment was started in the Ming Dynasty, 1368 to 1644 CE. It was in essence a private local bank where one could change money, make deposits, make loans to traders, care for remittances, and in some cases issue their own scrip. Zhang Ruan glanced at her. These two maids, although they were loyal, their thoughts were overly proper. On the contrary, Lu Zhu had traveled extensively in the past and had seen enough unpleasant matters in the streets. Therefore, when deploying her in such matters, she, Jr., would not have any qualms nor worries. However, as far as these two maids, she still did not dare to put them to much use yet. "Look at this rain." Zhang Ruan gazed outside the window. For a while now, it has rained and rained. Yet, no one knows when it will stop. Mrs. Cracking a joke, Bai Ji spoke in astonishment. "It is merely a shower at the beginning of spring. It might even stop tomorrow morning." "Yet I feel it won't stop." Zhang Ruan shook her head. In her past life it had also happened in this very year. This shower of rain had pitter-pattered down and as it poured, it had gone on continuously for 3 months. The grains at the beginning of spring were unable to be sown into the soil, and the flood wreaked havoc and devastation everywhere. Many people's houses and fields had been broken through and drowned by the large flood of rainwater, and at once, the capital was filled with refugees. She had remembered this matter very clearly because at the time, the rural residents had also been met with devastation by the flood. Due to the scarcity of food grains, Zhang Lan's family had then had her expenses severely reduced until it was almost to a cruel state. Although her house had not been as bad as to have been flooded and destroyed, still it was always damp and moist. Yet every day, she had dragged her body that rumbled with hunger to do some heavy manual work and weary labor until one day, she had nearly been washed away by the flood. Fortunately, a rough labor servant had seen this and had saved her. She would never forget how Zhang Lan's family had looked at her. At the time, their gazes had been filled with disappointment, as if it would have been a wonderful wish for her to have just drowned in the water. At that time, Zhang Ruan had thought that Zhang Lan's family had disliked her for taking up a part of the food grains for herself in the residence and therefore could not help but wish for her to drop dead. However, now that she thought about it, if she had died in that flood back then, Zhang Lan's family would probably have received a large sum as reward from Xia Yan. At the time, large numbers of refugees descended on the capital and every family, naturally, was unable to be taken care of. The refugees had scattered all over the city and when they were unable to obtain food, they then resorted to stealing everywhere. Naturally, the poor families did not have much food surplus and so, these refugees aimed their sights at the noble and rich families in the capital. At the time, as part of the city garrison, her cousin Zhao had led troops in suppression of these crimes. However, he was hacked to death by the refugees. Yet, as for that venerated emperor at this time, he gave an order to the Zhao family to fund the disaster relief. The Zhao family had put forth a sum of 10,200 in silver, and in the process emptied out all of their savings. From that moment, the Zhao family seemed to have begun its decline. When Zhang Ruan finally learned of this matter, it was only after she had entered the palace. During idle conversation, Zhao had inadvertently remarked that the one who had made the suggestion to the emperor had been Xian Li, saying that General Zhao's family was prosperous and plentiful, and perhaps they would have the money to aid in disaster relief. Zhang Ruan had already asked Xian Li about this matter and yet, Xian Li's reply was, the people were of importance and money was merely a worldly possession. To be able to protect the lives of those refugees, this was a good deed. Now that she thought some more, after that matter had ended, Xian Li's reputation and credit with the people had increased greatly while the Zhao family had weakened immensely. Or perhaps this too was in his plans. As for Zhao Yi's death, it was likely not as simple as it seemed. A grand and stately garrison guard from the capital, how could he have possibly been hacked down by an unarmed and defenseless rebel? Abruptly, her gaze became deeper. In this life, she had no thoughts of becoming estranged from the Zhao family. They were her backing and support that she needed to keep a close watch over, thus, there was no way she would allow them to suffer such humiliation. Even if this rain does not stop, why does Miss have to take out some silver? Baiji questioned. Miss, while it is good to have some on hand at your side presently, is there something that you would like to do? I have had Lu Zhu buy all of the grain in the capital, Zhang Ruan answered evenly. Oh, Miss, Lian Xiao looked at her wide-eyed. What is Miss going to do with so much grain? Right now, it was just at the beginning of spring and the new crop had yet to be delivered to the capital. All that was available was the old crop from the past year, and if it were measured by value, it should not be too expensive. It would be sufficient to buy more than half of these crops with just 2,000 or 3,000 pieces of silver. Just as the grain farmers were worried about being unable to sell all of their grain, seeing such a happenstance, they would definitely sell all of it to her. I am thinking that if this rain continues on continuously, then it will begin to flood. All of this grain would then become precious and valuable. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Mississippi. Baiji's lips twitched but in the end, did not say anything. In Zhang Ruan's words there was never any room for rebuttal and she had a staunch will. Once she had decided upon a matter, she would not be swayed. Thus, even if Baiji had thought that this move of Zhang Ruan's was truly too inconceivable, she could only follow suit with her wishes. Just at this moment Lu Zhu pushed open the door and came in. Upon seeing Zhang Ruan, she smiled. Miss, the people that I have used have already bought all of the grain and delivered it all into a storehouse in the west of the city. The key is in this servant's hands. She handed over the key to Zhang Ruan and continued, since there was no one else buying all of the old grain over the past few days, most of the rice and noodles have also been bought by this servant. You have done well. Zhang Ruan fiddled with the delicate and exquisite silver key in her hands. However, Miss, as she suddenly recalled, Lu Zhu remarked, when this servant was close to the courtyard's entrance, this servant saw 15 Yang. She seemed like she wanted to enter but when this servant asked her she left. Understood. Zhang Ruan muttered to herself irresolutely. Since this is the case, then we should go to 15 Yang's courtyard for a visit. Hong Ying had been embroidering in her courtyard, while the weather was not exactly good so the visibility from the sunlight was not very clear. After embroidering for a short time, she felt that she was not very satisfied with what she had been embroidering. She was truly annoyed about it as she saw a servant girl step forward and speak, "Inyang, eldest young miss has arrived." Eldest young miss? She frowned lightly as she had not thought that Zhang Ruan would come to her courtyard. Apart from Zhang Quan, no one had ever tread into this courtyard. As she stood up, Zhang Ruan happened to step into her room and smiled upon seeing her. So Inyang had been embroidering, it truly has been done well. Following her gaze, Hong Ying glanced at the embroidery on the table. It was a pouch that she had been embroidering for Zhang Quan. What she had been stitching was a noble Siberian crane in the clear skies, the crane looking vivid and lifelike. In contrast against that lofty and artistic conceptualization, the colors used had also been extremely appealing. "It is merely embroidered for fun," Hong Ying smiled. "If eldest young miss likes, on another occasion, Chieshan will embroider one for eldest young Mississippi." "Many thanks to Fifth Inyang then." Zhang Ruan smiled in agreement as her eyes made a sweep around the entire yard. "Truthfully, everyone has said that father dotes on Fifth Inyang the most, and I did not believe this to be true. Now that I have seen it, however, it truly is as others have said." The room had been arranged and decorated elaborately. When one saw the shelf of things placed before the table, not one object was not exquisite and precious. Presumably, Zhang Quan had put quite a bit of thought and effort into Hong Ying. Hong Ying was startled and smiled. Leor naturally dotes on foreign the most. Eldest young miss truly is jesting. "I never joke." Zhang Ruan chuckled. "Today, I've come to pay a visit to Fifth Inyang, though truly, it is not for anything of importance." With gentle countenance she continued, "Over these days in the Fu, it certainly has not been very peaceful or secure. Moreover, second sister and second brother have similarly met with misfortune in succession. Thinking about this, I have been pondering if the next would not be Ruan Yang." Upon hearing this, Hong Ying's heart made a leap as she looked at Zhang Ruan and replied, "Eldest young miss, where do these words stem from?" "Intuition." Zhang Ruan laughed. "I have no person that I am close to in the Fu, and my mother passed away in my early years. Although mother treats me pretty well, she already has both second sister and second brother." Her voice lowered slightly. "These words, I can only speak them with Fifth Inyang. If Fifth Inyang were the mistress of the Fu, how good would it be? With a kind-hearted person like Fifth Inyang around, one would surely protect Ruan Yang in all aspects. Ruan Yang would definitely repay Fifth Inyang's kindness, and the Jiang Fu would surely be harmonious, becoming more prosperous with each passing day." Nyang, an informal term for mother. JR uses it for Xiaomei. Muqin, a formal term for mother. JR uses it for her official mother, Xia Yan. Pursing her lips, Fifth Inyang was not sure why, but her heart was racing furiously. As she closely looked at Zhang Ruan, that pair of charming and clear eyes that seemed to contain a smile looked back at her. Clearly, they seemed gentle like lukewarm running water, yet it was as if one was seeking flowers in the mist. That is, one could not clearly see the emotions within. With her lowly origins from a brothel, she had seen innumerable number of people of every description. As such, she was even more capable of understanding others' motives and intentions. Yet, she could not fathom this young girl before her that was merely little more than a teenager. Chapter 69 Part 2. Chapter 69. A Marriage Alliance Part 2. Eldest young miss truly thinks that Chieshan has that right to be the mistress of the Jiangfu? Hong Ying could hear the faint tremor in her voice. Smiling as she took a sip from the teacup before her, Zhang Ruan pursed her lips shallowly. "Why not?" Hong Ying stared at her and suddenly revealed a smile. With eldest young miss speaking this highly of Chieshan, Chieshan does not know what to do. Truthfully, even if eldest young miss had not come to find Chieshan today, Chieshan would have definitely gone to meet eldest young miss before too long. Zhang Ruan smiled lightly as she looked at her, and Hong Ying continued. Chieshan was casually chatting with Leoi yesterday. Leoi had brought up the matter about the Li family's father and son. Eldest young miss is also all too aware of the matter between eldest young master of the Li family and second young Mississippi. With eldest young master Li like this now, Grand Counselor Li will probably not be able to tolerate second young miss. Yet Leoi does not want to shed all pretense of cordiality with Grand Counselor Li, and thus was then thinking of having eldest young miss take the place of second young miss to marry into the Li family. After saying this, she cautiously observed Zhang Ruan's expression. Yet all she saw was that bright and gorgeous countenance. The expression remained unchanged. The smile on the edge of her lips stayed the same as if one had put on an absolutely perfect mask. Jiang Ruan lightly sighed. With father loving second sister this dearly, it really makes me feel envious. Upon seeing this, Hong Ying remarked, Cheshin's heart is anxious as well. This was clearly a matter stirred up by second young miss. So how could one have eldest young miss compensate for their loss instead? Moreover, that eldest young master of the Li family presently could be considered a useless person. If eldest young miss was truly to marry over, then miss might not be able to bear the inevitable suffering. Jiang Ruan muttered to herself for a short moment before she shot a smile towards Hong Ying. Thank you 15 Yang for your counsel, only this is father's decision. I too am unable to interfere with it if he truly has decided upon such intentions, therefore, Ruan Yang too can only accept as the daughter of the Jiang family. Hong Ying was flabbergasted for a moment. Eldest young miss is willing to be married over. I may consent, father may consent however, who knows if Li Darren would? Jiang Ruan smiled lightly as she stood up. It has already been a while, I ought to return. Pausing for a second, her gaze fell on the embroidered thing on the table with a light laugh. Father loves 15 Yang dearly. It is good for 15 Yang to show such care for father as well. However, Ruan Yang would still like to remind 15 Yang of a phrase. If there is no heir, then 15 Yang would in fact, be the same as eldest and second Yin Yang. With a smile, she continued to finish up on her statement. Even if there were heirs without any status or position, the fate of all the Yin-Yangs and their children would be the same. After Jiang Ruan had been gone for a long time, Hong Ying still remained rooted to that same spot, lost in thought. Seeing this, the maidservant standing beside her questioned gently and cautiously, Yin Yang. Waving her hand, Hong Ying's expression was filled with weariness as she replied in a low voice, After all is said and done, what does eldest young miss plan on doing? In the capital at Jining Wang Fu, Yi Feng stood before the desk as he spoke. We have received news from General Guan. They will be withdrawing troops from the front lines next month and return to the capital. Pausing, he then continued, Today, this subordinate was on duty and heard others discuss that someone has been unconstrained in buying up all of the remaining grain in the capital. One feared that this had something to do with His Eighth Highness and took note to ask around a little. Apparently, this was the doings of the maidservant of eldest young miss of the Jiang family. He frowned, however. One does not know what is the purpose of doing this. Turning around, Xiao Xiao's heroically spirited eyebrows were slightly raised as they augmented that elegantly handsome face of his, making it seem several degrees more stern and austere. He spoke, Continue to make some inquiries. Pay attention to the movements of Li Dong's Fu. Ingqi de Mei. This is a phrase that gets lost in translation. A commonly used phrase to describe both men and women's eyebrows. It refers to angular-shaped eyebrows that are basically in the shape of a sword's blade. Here is a visual illustration of heroically spirited eyebrows. Grand Counselor Li? Yi Feng was startled. Master is planning to deal with him ahead of time? Xiao Xiao shook his head. The Li family's eldest son is already at death's door. And while this matter has something to do with the Jiang family, they do not want to incur the wrath of the Li family. If my assumption is not wrong, Zhang Quan will definitely take some action. Yi Feng pondered. Behind the Jiang family is the Xia family, and the Xia family is also part of 8th Prince's faction, so perhaps 8th Prince will personally step in. After all, both the Xia and Li family were rare resources, thus Xian Li would definitely not let this slip by him in vain. He suddenly chuckled. One is truly unaware. Once 8th Prince is aware of the nest of internal conflict between his subordinates under his control, what kind of mood would he be in? In short, it is truly great that the Li family's eldest son has met with misfortune. Second young lady of the Jiang family has done such a great deed too. In any event, for her to have neutered Li Yang like this, the Li and Jiang family would definitely have enmity between them. Xiao Xiao did not correct Yi Feng's words and recalled that very night, how Jiang Ruan had unflinchingly used the porcelain fragment to cut that plaything of Li Yang so nimbly. She was clearly a young lady in the boudoir, yet did not have the slightest bit of shyness or embarrassment from seeing a man's genitals. In her gaze there was only the cold stare of indifference. The gaze she had used to look at Li Yang was as if she had seen a damned pig waiting to be slaughtered. Ever since he was 10 years old, he had accepted a role in the genie guards. and had taken bloody steps to move up in strength. Were it not for the fact that he had seen this in person, he really would not believe that a young lady from the boudoir could possess a gaze similar to a murderer. Genie Wei, also known as another title, or literally brocade-clad guards. It is the appellation of the imperial secret police that served emperors of the Ming dynasty in China. It was founded to serve as personal bodyguards in the past for the Hongwu Emperor in 1368, but eventually became an imperial military body. These guards don a distinctive golden-yellow uniform with a tablet worn on his torso, and carry a special blade weapon as a form of recognition. This eldest daughter of Jiang Quan's, how exactly was she raised? A moment later, Xiao Xiao moved on from his stray thoughts and remarked, "I will take a trip to enter the palace." In the northern side of the capital, there was an incessant sound of firecrackers at the gate of a large three-entrance courtyard residence. In front of its vermilion gate pillars, there were two lions that were bearing fangs and brandishing claws, and on the top there was a shining gold plaque, bound with some red flowers and etched with two large words, Lu Fu. Sanjin Dazhai, a three-entrance courtyard residence. This phrase refers to a Tsihiyuan, a quadrangle compound that conforms with the symmetry of the north and south axis. The main house is on the central north-south axis, and the less important structures are positioned on the west and east sides. These structures date from the 1045–770 BC, and have over 2,000 years of history. They are a cultural symbol of Chinese traditional architecture. Based on the structural arrangement, every residence varies based on the size of the area that it is built in and is often built based on the owner's status. Depending on the arrangements, a courtyard may vary from 2 to 5 entrances. In general, a standard 4-section rectangular compound leans to the north and faces south with an alleyway running from the east to west beside it. A residence of a wealthy merchant can span up to 6 major courtyards, 20 smaller courtyards and 313 rooms. Here is an illustration of what a Tsihiyuan looks like, and is often a reflection of how the women in the boudoir live an extremely sheltered and restrained life, often not being able to even leave for the outer courtyard. It is also a reflection of how the wealthy aristocratic society lived in comparison to the commoners in the past. More information can be found. Zhongyao Wuzhao. This means to make threatening gestures. This was the official residence that the emperor had conferred to the top-scoring youth in the palace examination. Lu Foran was only a few years more than 30, yet her face carried the pallor of one who had experienced the hardships of life. The hair at her temples was already full of spots of white, as if she was 50. Even so, she still wore a plain cyan straight qipao that had been embroidered with lotuses. Her hair was combed without even the slightest hair out of place, and with a wide smile on her face, she gave out a little reward money to everyone. The 4 servant girls conferred by the emperor were all full of smiles as they stood at the side. Many people had expressed their congratulations, while receiving a monetary reward. Among them, there was no lack of their former neighbors. With this, Lu Min had become the carp who had leapt and transformed at the mystical dragon gate into a dragon. Henceforth, the Lu family had thus brought honor to their ancestors. After giving away all of the monetary reward, Lu Foran asked the servant girl beside her, "Why has Minner not come out yet?" The servant girl smiled in reply, "Perhaps he is in the room tidying. This servant will go to urge him." After saying this, she turned around and left. In the study, Lu Min was spellbound while looking at a painting hung on the wall. The residence that had been bestowed by the emperor was spacious, abundant and beautiful, the study being at least twice the size of the previous one he had. Henceforth, he would certainly have ample space to stack up all those books of his. Yet to have arrived at this point in the depth of his heart, he was somewhat dazzled. All of this, was this what he truly wanted? A few days ago, while he was at the Imperial Academy's student residences, he had had something pilfered. What he had lost was the very letter that mysterious person had sent him. Those letters of his had all disappeared without trace, as if they had never existed in the first place. Lu Min had asked the study attendant, and he had stated being unaware of it. However, as it happened, none of his other belongings were missing. He could not help but suspect that these letters had been taken away by that mysterious person themselves. Shu Tong. This refers to the male servant who was a minor, from the family that attended school with his master and his other younger siblings. If it were not for this painting of the light of the fireflies in the moonlight before him, Lu Min would have almost thought that these days had been merely an illusion, and that mysterious person was simply a character that his subconsciousness had made up. He closely scrutinized the painting before him. The lines in the drawing were elegant, confident and free. It truly showed off one's ability. Lu Min could not help but speculate, what kind of person could they be? After getting used to having another person to discuss with him some lines to debate about from a book, now that this very person had suddenly vanished, it made him feel somewhat lonely. Young master, Foreign urges you to hasten over. The cheeks on the newly arrived servant girl were slightly flushed upon seeing the delicate, honest and scholarly young man. Taking another glance at the painting before him, Lu Min remarked, "Let us go then." There were 2 blooming flowers on one plant. Each branch showed its own models 6. 6 Hua Kai Liang Dua, Ge Biaoi Ji, a method to narrate a story or information in a long novel, one that had many chapters. During the olden times, especially from the Ming dynasty onwards, these novels would have a summary couplet heading each chapter. What it means is that in the story's progress it has branched into 2 parts. Of these 2 parts it can mean many as well. One by one would be related/narrated about first and then the other would be explained. Basically, it is a way to talk about 2 sides of a coin. In the 8th Prince's Fu in the capital, Xianli had placed the letter in his hand down with a slight knit of his brows. Seeing this, the advisor who had been standing behind him asked, "Your Highness, has something indeed happened?" Xianli took a quick look at the letter on the table. Marquis Xia's Fu has sent a letter. An issue has been raised with Grand Counselor Li. In his heart, it was difficult to suppress astonishment. If what had been described in Xia Cheng's letter could be believed, it stated that Li Yang had been castrated by someone in the Jiangfu and now, Li Dong was seeking revenge on Li Yang's behalf. Thus, he would not let Xia Cheng's granddaughter Jiang Su off the hook. Xia Cheng had written in this letter that Jiang Su had been framed by someone but also did not mention who the perpetrator was. 7 Wai Suan knew. The relation here is the daughter's daughter, or rather this is describing Jiang Su who is Xia Cheng's granddaughter through his daughter, Xia Yan, a granddaughter of a different surname. Xianli had briefly told Advisor Yu about this matter, and the advisor crinkled his brows in deep thought for a while. "Your Highness, I'm afraid this matter was the doing of a person with aspirations. With something bad that has happened to eldest young master of the Li family, Grand Counselor Li would bear some animosity towards the Jiang family, and would similarly bear some enmity with the Xia family as well. This must be an extremely vicious motive of theirs to create a nest of internal conflict among the subordinates of Your Highness." "Naturally, I am aware of this," Xianli continued. "Li Dong is also personally aware that I am inevitably linked with him. However, I am unwilling to lose the Xia family either. In addition, Minster Jiang now has some considerable strength in the imperial court as well. If both sides were to raise a dispute, then this would only do more harm than good for me." "Could it have been from 5th Prince's side?" the advisor asked. "Lately, 5th Prince's approval and opinion from the imperial court has been gradually rising. Moreover, His Majesty has placed quite a bit of trust in him as well. I am clear of Father Emperor's temperament." Xianli lightly snorted. "With how 5th brother has rapidly leapt up now, then in the future, he will fall even more miserably. I actually do not believe that 5th brother could be this brilliant to pacify the people in the Jiangfu." "Then 4th Prince?" the advisor asked. "On the surface, 4th brother does not seem to be in contention for the throne. However, one has no choice but to guard against him. I dread that it may be the Crown Prince." The advisor was startled for a while. The Crown Prince has flaws in both speech and virtue, even in government affairs. He does not seem to have any achievements either. Moreover, he seems rather stupid and naive. Why would Your Highness be worried? If this was solely the Crown Prince, then indeed, it would be nothing to fear about. Xianli squinted. One can only fear that this was the intent of Father Emperor. In his earlier years, His Majesty had wanted to change the conferred Crown Prince. Perhaps he has already grown a mind to spurn him now. But why would he handle this so? the advisor asked. Xianli commented. "I fear that this may merely be a smokescreen. If not, you can see how after these many years, while the Crown Prince has made enemies of innumerable people in the capital, he is still towering over them without a fall. If this was not incited by Father Emperor on the sly, then I'm afraid that he would have long been devoured without even having the remains of his bones left behind. The advisor cupped his hands in obeisance. This subordinate is truly unable to grasp His Majesty's intentions clearly. With a disgusted glimpse at the advisor who had been kneeling beneath him, Xianli maintained his mild tone. I do not blame you. Even after getting along with Father Emperor for these many years, I too have not been able to ascertain what he has been thinking in his heart either. The advisor thought for a while and then remarked, in fact, if Your Highness wants to consolidate power, there is still a method. It would be better to connect by marriage with the Jiang family. Xianli arched an eyebrow. The Jiang family? The advisor cupped his hands in salute. Now what Your Highness needs the most is nothing else but the power and influence of the Xia and the Li family. Your Highness having a connection with the Xia family is too evident, but if it is a connection with the Jiang family, then that would be tantamount to roping the Xia family in as well. He paused for a while before he continued. Moreover, now with the young miss of the Jiang family still being quite young, it may be good to first fix a marriage. Someday in the future, if there are any changes in the variables, even then it won't be too late to change your mind. Xianli frowned, thinking of the rumors in the capital a few days ago that the Jiang foreign had hired an assassin to frame eldest young lady but instead through hearsay, had entrapped second young lady instead. In addition to that, there was the matter at Bai Hualu where Zhang Chao had staked 1,000 pieces of gold on one throw yet had no money to settle the account and finally, had one little finger chopped off. Eiji Qianjin. It means to throw away money recklessly or to be extravagant. Unhappily, he remarked, the Jiang Fu is in a turmoil. Besides, that second young lady of the Jiang Fu now has a bad reputation. How could I possibly marry her? Wouldn't this be inviting everyone under the heavens to make a mockery of it? Your Highness, the advisor replied, isn't there still an eldest young lady in the Jiang Fu? This eldest young lady's biological mother is indeed a member of General Zhao's Fu. Although it may only be in name, if Your Highness were to marry eldest young lady of the Jiang family, not only with the Jiang Fu, there would be a relation with the Xia Fu and perhaps, Your Highness could even build up a connection with General Zhao's Fu. Zhao Guang, that coarse fellow, Xianli answered, has always been a part of the Crown Prince's faction. He would not easily defect. As for Zhang Ruan, a memory of that night at the Lantern Festival had surfaced in his mind, on that large boat, the indifferent smile on that red-clad young lady's face. Unexpectedly, there was a tight grip in his heart, resembling a feeling of caring a great deal about this. Now, it seems that the best solution is to connect via marriage. The advisor still suggested this. If Your Highness was to agree to a marriage with the young lady of the Jiang family, then at Grand Counselor Li's end, even if in some way he is discontented, he would not act blindly without thinking either. If Your Highness spared no effort like this to show grace and favor to the Jiang family, then the Jiang and the Xia family would strive their hardest to assist Your Highness too. What you have said is not wrong either. Once more, Xianli picked up the letter on the desk. Perhaps I should solemnly consider your words. In the letter, it was an invitation to Xianli to go to Marquis Xia's Fu to attend a gathering. He thought for a while and continued, someone come over. Reply on my behalf to the old gentleman, Marquis Xia, and send a message that I have received the old Marquis gentleman's invitation. In 3 days' time, I will pay a visit and call on his home. When old Marquis Xia received the communicated message from the attendant at Xianli's side, he heaved a sigh of relief. Xia Foreign looked at him and urged, what is the matter? Has 8th Prince responded positively? He has, old Marquis Xia answered her. Go send a letter to the Jiang Fu and ask Yenner to get ready and prepare sewer and chower, then bring them over. Pausing, he then continued, tell her to bring that Zhang Ruan along as well. Xia Foreign nodded naturally since she caused Su to ruin her looks. Then this Zhang Ruan indeed has some ability. The eyes of old Marquis Xia were completely clouded. I have yet to tell this matter to His 8th Highness, however. 8th Highness must have assumed that this matter was the doing of 5th Prince and so would have some misgivings. Therefore, he has decided to involve my Xia Fu and rope in some relation with my Fu. Although it is so, nevertheless, it would be disastrous to keep Zhang Ruan around. Yenner has repeatedly met losses and miscalculations in her hands. Rather, I would truly like to see what kind of demon this person is, to be this ruthless at such a young age. The rebirth of an ill-fated consort. Chapter 70 Part 1. Chapter 70. Without any sense of shame, Part 1. At noon on the second day, Xia Yan had Jiang Susu accompany her to Ruanju. Jiang Susu wore a white veil which completely covered the lower half of her face, so that only her eyes were visible. Xia Yan had said, "Ruaner, tomorrow we will visit your maternal grandparents Fu. You ought to tidy yourself up. Your maternal grandmother has not seen you both for a long time, and I fear she misses you terribly." Waizuma maternal grandmother. Behind her back, Lian Xiao eyed Xia Yan with disdain. Xia Yan spoke so affectionately, but in the end, these were Jiang Susu's maternal grandparents who had nothing to do with Jiang Ruan. Of course, second younger sister and second elder brother have so much going on, it would ease their hearts to go out, Jiang Ruan said with a slight smile. On hearing her words, Jiang Susu and Xia Yan's faces immediately froze. "Then let us not trouble Ruaner any further," Xia Yan said gently. "I'll visit your second elder brother. I'm afraid this situation is the result of someone's entrapment, and he was also born under an unlucky star. Mother must advise second elder brother well. He has been beset by setbacks after failing the examinations, which is a great cause for worry," Jiang Ruan said concernedly. Xia Yan froze once more and forced herself to smile. Second elder brother will be gratified to hear of Ruan Yang's concern. After saying this, she stood up. "Mother will not tarry any longer. Suer, let's go." When the mother-daughter pair left, Baiji looked at their backs and said, "Miss, why would you suddenly want to visit Marquis Xia's Fu for no rhyme or reason? I'm afraid that some unforeseen mishap may occur." Although Baiji's way of thinking was upright and proper, she was by no means stupid. Jiang Ruan shook her head and said, "I merely want to take advantage of the influence and power of Marquis Xia's Fu, that's all." As she said this, Lu Zhu entered the room and said, "Miss, Master Gu has sent you a letter by way of his servant to say that General Guan will be returning to the capital next month. It may be that the resolution of young Master's situation is just a matter of waiting." Jiang Ruan's eyes lit up. She smiled slightly as she said, "This is indeed good news. Next month is not too late. If young Master returns, Master will presumably not treat you this way." The manner in which Jiang Quan treated Jiang Ruan was due to her only being a daughter, while Jiang Xinji was the eldest son. At present, Jiang Chao had wasted his slight advantage. It was to be assumed that Jiang Quan would once again give prominence to Jiang Xinji, who would also protect Jiang Ruan from being bullied by others. "That's not definite," Jiang Ruan smiled coldly. "My eldest brother and I are thorns in the side of those in this Fu. You must not divulge the slightest hint of the news about him to anyone outside." Baiji and Lu Zhu looked at each other in dismay, but they saw that Jiang Ruan was already frowning slightly, and her expression was more severe than they had ever seen before. In her previous lifetime, she had been in the countryside residence when she received news of Jiang Xinji's death on the battlefield. That time just so happened to coincide with the Xia family's rise in status. If one thought about it carefully, at present there were ulterior motives and hidden secrets everywhere. If Xia Yan had done some ruthless pruning for the sake of Jiang Chao's status, it was not improbable that she had secretly eliminated Jiang Xinji. Perhaps Jiang Quan had even known about it, but first, he had never had any fatherly affection for Jiang Xinji, and second, he had to rely on the power of the Xia family. Thus, it was highly likely that he had given his tacit approvals. Thinking of her gentle and kind eldest brother, Jiang Ruan clenched her fists. If Jiang Xinji was still alive, she would expend all her energy to protect her beloved flesh and blood, no matter what the cost. What about Marquis Xia's Fu? Her eyes turned cold. There were some people there that she had not seen for a long time. "Lu Zhu, for the next few days, you and Baiji stay in the Fu and keep watch on the activities and movements here, especially pertaining to Fifth Yang," Jiang Ruan said. "Lian Xiao, you stay with me. Ask Xu Xiang to come here." "Xu Xiang." Lian Xiao frowned. "Miss, that girl does not have good intentions. She may cause us some trouble. If so, it will be her own trouble." Jiang Ruan smiled faintly as she said, "Go on, I have made my own arrangements in these matters." Early the next day, Xu Xiang and Lian Xiao were waiting outside. Compared to before, Xu Xiang had clearly lost some weight, and when she looked up at Zhang Ruan, her eyes contained a hint of fear. When Zhang Ruan looked at this servant girl kneeling before her with her head bowed, she found it very difficult to associate her with the gentle and self-confident palace maid in her memory, who always appeared before Zhang Ruan with concern upon her face. She put on her outer coat, smiled and said, "Let's go." Jiang Susu and Xia Yan had already been waiting in the horse carriage for some time. When Zhang Ruan entered, she discovered that Zhang Li and Zhang Dan were also there. Zhang Chao was in another carriage. Zhang Li looked at Jiang Susu's veiled face with derision, but since Xia Yan was present, she did not dare to say anything. Zhang Dan was sitting right in the middle of the carriage and looked extremely uncomfortable. When she saw Zhang Ruan arrive, she smiled timidly at her. Zhang Ruan returned the smile and sat down next to Xia Yan. Xia Yan looked at her and smiled. "This is Ruaner's first visit to your maternal grandfather's residence. The last time he saw you was 5 years ago. In the blink of an eye you have become a young lady." Waizifu, maternal grandfather. Zhang Ruan smiled faintly. Ruan Yang also misses maternal grandfather very much. The first time she had met old Marquis Xia was when Zhao Mei died. As she knelt in the morning hall in her white silk mourning robes, she had seen that elderly man with an amiable face move forward to chat with Zhang Quan. Not long later, Xia Yan became the legal wife. Later, when she entered the palace, she often saw old Marquis Xia and his womenfolk at the palace banquets. The Xia family's utter lack of shame was vivid in her mind. At that time, the granddaughter of the Xia family, Xia Jiao Jiao, had entered the palace together with her. She had been conferred the title of Mei Ren, and had tripped up Zhang Ruan many times, both covertly and overtly. Ultimately, Xia Jiao Jiao had received the emperor's favor, and even though no one knew whether this favor was authentic, Xia Jiao Jiao used her power to humiliate Zhang Ruan continually. She could only remember at the end, when she was disgraced and imprisoned, that Xia Jiao Jiao had emerged unscathed, and had been sent back to the Fu by old Marquis Xia. Mei Ren, lit. Beautiful lady, one of the ranks of the imperial concubines. Depending on which dynasty this story is set in, Mei Ren could be a fairly high rank. As soon as Zhang Ruan said those words, Xia Yan felt an inexplicable chill seize her. She examined Zhang Ruan's expression carefully, but was unable to decipher the meaning behind her words. She thus smiled and said, "Then, has Ruaner already decided what present to give?" "Present?" Zhang Ruan looked at her in puzzlement. Xia Yan broke into laughter. "This child, don't you know that you must offer a token gift when you visit your maternal grandfather's residence? However, you are not to blame. You were at the countryside residence for so long without anyone to teach you the ways of the world." Zhang Li seemed to be smiling mockingly at her from the side, while Zhang Dan remained silent. "Mother has spoken truly." Zhang Ruan smiled slightly as she said, "Today I will receive instruction. In future, when visiting, I will no longer give reason for ridicule." She paused before continuing, however, "I have not prepared any gifts at this time. What have my younger sisters prepared?" "I have embroidered handkerchiefs for everyone." Jiang Susu's face was veiled, but her eyes were just as beautiful as in the past. "Although they are simple and crude, they are still hand-sewn and convey my affection." Zhang Li initially did not want to say anything, but she was afraid of Xia Yan, and she also wanted to show off. Thus she said complacently, "My gift is a facial powder sent by the palace. Just by applying a little, one's face will be incomparably fair, and no scars can be seen." Her words were said without deeper intent, but they caused Jiang Susu to stiffen under her veil, and Xia Yan also squeezed her palms together. Only Zhang Dan's voice was heard, saying, I have personally made a bottle of honey. My sister's gifts are all so wonderful," Zhang Ruan said in a low voice, "but I did not prepare anything." "Silly child," Xia Yan said as she patted Zhang Ruan's head affectionately. "How could mother forget you? I knew that you might forget about this courtesy, so this morning, I asked the kitchen to prepare a fresh basket of dianxin. It's so cold at the moment, the dianxin will last for several days. The dianxin is exquisite, so it will not lose out in terms of etiquette." Zhang Ruan was somewhat astonished and said immediately to Xia Yan, "Mother has taken so much trouble over this and is so considerate to think on Ruan Yang's behalf. Ruan Yang is ashamed." You and I are mother and daughter, why would I mind that? Don't talk nonsense. Afterwards, when we meet your maternal grandfather, remember to present the gift yourself. Jiang Ruan nodded. Seeing her like this, Xia Yan relaxed and Jiang Susu smiled without saying anything. Being impatient with their conversation, Jiang Li had earlier closed her eyes to rest. Jiang Dan saw Xia Yan's expression and became more pensive. Marquis Xia's Fu and the Jiang Fu were far from each other. The road was wet due to the rain, and the sky was gloomy. When they reached Marquis Xia's Fu, it was not even evening yet, but because of the thick layer of dark clouds, it felt like it was already night. At the entrance, the elderly maidservant Xiao Si welcomed them and invited them in. As she walked with them, she said, "Miss has finally returned. Old master and foreign have been waiting for you in the hall for some time." Xia Yan was full of smiles and praise. When they reached the grand and glittering great hall of Marquis Xia's Fu, there was indeed a man and a woman awaiting their arrival. The man was beyond 60 years of age with a round, amiable face and a mouth that was continually uplifted at the corners, making him look like the Maitreya Buddha. The woman looked to be in her early 40s with a rosy complexion. She was bedecked with jewels, but also looked extremely cordial. Milu Fo, Maitreya Buddha. According to Buddhist tradition, Maitreya is a bodhisattva who will appear on earth in the future, achieve complete enlightenment, and teach the pure Dharma. According to scriptures, Maitreya is the successor to the present Buddha, Gautama Buddha, aka Sakyamuni Buddha. The prophecy of the arrival of Maitreya refers to a time in the future when the Dharma will have been forgotten by most on the terrestrial world. In some Chinese Buddhist temples, Maitreya Buddha is depicted as being bare-chested, big-bellied, and smiling. Standing to the side were another man and woman. The slightly older man was of average appearance, with a solemn expression. The woman by his side was, on the contrary, as lovely as a flower. This was the young master of the Xia family, Xia Tianyi, and his wife Shen Rou. There was another younger pair. The man was handsome and bright, and the woman by his side, while not as pretty as Shen Rou, could also be said to be delicately pretty. However, she had a long face and thin lips, which made her look somewhat mean. This was the second young master Xia Tiankai, and his wife Wuxia. There was yet another pair standing between the two previous pairs, a young man and lady. The young lady was dainty and wore a sky-blue skirt of soft satin, patterned with phoenixes and misty flowers, which gave her the appearance of a gentle and charming beauty. The young man's skin tone was slightly darker than was common, but he was still handsome. His expression was exactly the same as that of the second young master. The young lady was Xia Jiao Jiao, born of the first wife. The young man was Xia Jun, born of the second wife. T/N, the first legal wife, is referred to as the main room, and the second wife is the second room. At this moment, when everyone was standing in the great hall, Xia Foreign was the first one to call out, "Yanner." Xia Yan responded with a smile, "Mother." Then she nudged Zhang Chao and Jiang Susu and said, "Why haven't you greeted your grandmother?" With a smile on her face, Xia Foreign beckoned with her hand and said, "Chao Suer, come here and let grandmother take a good look at you." Jiang Chao and Jiang Susu obediently stepped forward. Xia Foreign patted their heads, but when she took in Jiang Susu's veil and the gauze wrapped around Jiang Chao's right hand, her gaze darkened. Younger sister-in-law is finally back. Mother has been constantly nagging over the past few days. Shen Rou, the wife of eldest young Master 6, took the lead to say, "It has been such a long time since we've met. Suer has become even more beautiful." 6 Shainai, young lady of the house/wife of the young master. When these words were uttered, Xia Yan could not prevent her expression from stiffening, and within her sleeves, Jiang Susu's hands clenched tightly. Xia Tianyi glared at Shen Rou for a moment, while a hint of schadenfreude glittered in Xia Jiao Jiao's eyes. Xia Foreign did not respond either, and it was Xia Tiankai who said, "How many days does younger sister plan to stay this time? Why don't you stay for a few more days?" "I've just brought Suer and Chao home to visit father and mother. That's all," Xia Yan smilingly said. Suddenly, old Marquis Xia, who had remained silent up till now, spoke. "Isn't eldest young miss also here?" "Which one is eldest young miss?" Xia Yan smiled as she said, "Ruaner, come here and greet your maternal grandfather." It was only then that Zhang Ruan, who had been standing in the shadows, said softly, "Yes," before moving forward slowly. Previously, in order to put on an obvious display of their power to the remaining daughters of the Zhang family, all the members of the Xia family had deliberately ignored everyone else, electing to speak only to Xia Yan and those identified with her. Now, with only a soft and gentle response, a young girl clad in red emerged from behind Xia Yan and slowly lifted her head. Red lips and white teeth, one had to linger to take it all in. Although she was still young, her appearance exuded elegant grace, without an iota of timidity or childishness. Like a well-decanted refined wine, once the jar was opened, a strong fragrance drifted across the air. Xia Cheng narrowed his eyes slightly. Although there was a smile on his face, there was an inexplicable pressure making itself felt. However, the expression of the young girl before him did not falter. She continued to smile slightly, and it seemed as if no one could jolt her even the slightest degree from her erect bearing. Xia Cheng was flabbergasted. Currently, he occupied a high-level position, and his every act and movement carried with it the weight of his power and authority. Although he did not shake the earth with every step, an ordinary girl would at least be scared when she witnessed him in action. However, Zhang Ruan was acting as if nothing and no one of significance was present. Was she ignorant, or was this part of a carefully devised, formidable scheme? Remembering the words in Xia Yan's letter, he gained a deeper understanding of Zhang Ruan and abruptly smiled. She is indeed eldest young miss, such that our Fu's Jiao Jiao cannot compare. Chapter 70 Part 2. Chapter 70. Without any sense of shame, Part 2. When Xia Jiao Jiao saw Zhang Ruan, she felt the heat of resentment arise in her heart. She herself was a natural beauty, but Jiang Susu had always been more beautiful than her. It had been so difficult to have Jiang Susu's appearance ruined, and now she saw that Zhang Ruan's looks were not in the least inferior to Jiang Susu's. She had initially thought that even if the daughter raised in a rural village was impressive in appearance, her bearing would certainly be crude and vulgar. Looking at her now, however, Zhang Ruan held herself with the manner and appearance of someone of the highest rank of nobility, such that Xia Jiao Jiao herself, in contrast, was completely overshadowed. Xia Tiankai smiled faintly as he said, "Younger sister, so, there is actually such a fairy-like person in your Fu." These words were vaguely coquettish, such that Lian Chao furrowed her brows minutely. Zhang Ruan, on the other hand, seemed not to have heard them, and there was no trace of embarrassment in her expression. This scene played out before the eyes of everyone in the Xia household, and naturally was also much food for thought. After conversing for a while, Xia Yan had the maidservant bring forward the prepared gifts. Of course, Jiang Susu's handkerchiefs were well received by all, and Zhang Li and Zhang Dan's gifts were also praised. Zhang Ruan gave Xia Furan the box of dianxin which Xia Yan had prepared for her, and Xia Furan ordered a servant to put it away. Out of the blue, as if she had suddenly remembered something, Xia Furan said, "Since you have all returned today. Last month, the Fu's ancestral hall underwent renovation, so why don't you go and offer incense to the Xia family ancestors? The great master who was invited here a few days ago said that the Xia family would suffer a great calamity this year, and this could only be averted if someone born in the 4th month prayed with sincerity for an entire night. I've heard Yenner say that Ruaner was born on the 7th day of the 4th month according to the lunar calendar. I wonder if Ruaner would be able to help grandmother with this, and pray at the Xia household for a night." Lian Chao opened her mouth to speak, intending to put a stop to this. Zhang Ruan was not a member of the Xia family, and even if the Xia family was going to suffer a calamity, what did that have to do with Zhang Ruan? Apart from that, this matter of kneeling in prayer in the ancestral hall overnight, these days, the weather was bitterly cold. Even she could see that there was no good intention in this proposal. Zhang Ruan's physical condition had already been poor during her earlier years at the countryside residence. If she had to kneel for an entire night, even if she did not collapse, she would definitely become seriously ill. However, before Lian Chao had time to speak, she heard Zhang Ruan say, "If it can be of any help, Ruaner will do her best." Xia Furan smiled in satisfaction. Ruaner is really a sensible child. Zhang Dan looked at Zhang Ruan, and then at Xia Yan, who was nodding her head, and then looked down in silence. After a few more words were exchanged, Xia Furan said she was tired, and asked everyone to go to their rooms first. Xia Yan and Jiang Susu accompanied Jiang Ruan to the ancestral hall to light a stick of incense for the Xia family ancestors. Thereafter they left, leaving Jiang Ruan behind in the ancestral hall to spend the night in prayer alone. Xia Yan looked at her with a pang in her heart. Ruana, this is really hard on you. If it were not that I have to take care of Chower and Sewer, since they are still in ill health, Mother would definitely join you in kneeling overnight in prayer. Mother, what are you saying? Jiang Ruan said as she smiled faintly. Mother and I are mother and daughter after all. Besides, kneeling here overnight is also to pray on behalf of the Xiao family. Perhaps the celestial deities will look with favor on my sincerity, as I kneel in prayer and grant me all that my heart hopes for. She said this with all innocence, with no trace of humor in her face, as if she spoke with absolute truth. What does Ruaner hope for? Xia Yan asked with a smile. I hope Father's political career will continue to ascend. The higher you climb, the worse you fall. I hope Mother will be in good health. Live healthily so that you can see all you manage slowly crumble bit by bit, and experience the suffering and pain for a long time. Eldest brother's reputation will spread far and wide. Everyone in the world will know his name, for he will be a target of scorn and insults. Second younger sister will marry an ideal husband, and then die at the hands of her beloved husband. Ancestors of the Xiao family, Jiang Ruan intoned softly with her hands together in prayer. If you can see this faithful devotee's sincerity, then allow the Jiangfu and Xiaofu to be like the Luoyang peony, blooming in flourishing prosperity for a long time. Luoyang mudan is the tree peony, Peonia suffruticosa, which symbolizes prosperity. Luoyang in Henan province, the capital city of many ancient dynasties, is regarded as the birthplace of the peony and hosts a peony festival every year. You will rot, you will collapse, you will fall from the stateliest mansions to be trampled underfoot in the filthiest mud. You will face reckoning, you will suffer dissension, and at the end you will die by your own hands. O gods above, if you see Jiang Ruan's sincerity, then let the Jiangfu and Xiaofu be like the Luoyang peony. After a brief moment of initial prosperity, let them be unable to withstand the force of decay and slowly, very slowly, wither and fade away. Jiang Ruan pronounced each word slowly and deliberately. However, these outwardly bright and glorious phrases seemed, on the contrary, to be like black curses, transmitting the odor of death. Xia Yan looked at Jiang Ruan's tranquil profile, and was suddenly seized with a sense of dread. She immediately stood up, repressing with difficulty the panic in her heart, and said, So all thanks to Ruaner for tonight. Mother still has some things to see to, and will leave first. After Xia Yan had fled the ancestral hall, Jiang Ruan slowly got up from the ground. Kneel? These were the scum of the Xia family. How could such a place be worthy to bear her knees? She glanced around at her surroundings. Just as Xia Foran had said, the ancestral hall had just been renovated. The ground was paved with the coldest flagstones, which also retained dampness, such that even a stove would be unable to remain functional. The hall was empty and frigid. Even the lamps were unlit, the only illumination streaming in from the faint moonlight coming through the windows. Moreover, there was a hole in the roof, which might have been Xia Foran's handiwork. Icy rain fell through the hole, rendering anyone it landed upon even colder. In this dark and cold place, her only companions were the many ancestral plaques displayed before her, while the green smoke from the incense burner gave off a peculiar smell. Jiang Ruan took out her handkerchief and moved to stand by a broken window. There the air circulated freely. She wetted the handkerchief and used it to cover her nose and mouth, frowning slightly. After a while, Lian Xiao's voice sounded from outside. Miss, your servants are here to bring you something to eat. The door of the ancestral hall opened to admit Lian Xiao, with a food basket in her hands, and Xu Xiang. Lian Xiao said, I took some steamed buns from the kitchen. Miss has not eaten anything since you arrived. You cannot mistreat your body. After saying this, she made use of the faint moonlight to take stock of Xu Xiang and said to her, Why are you standing there doing nothing? Come and help. Lian Xiao was a first-rank servant. When Xu Xiang had come to them, Jiang Ruan had appointed her to fill a vacant post as a second-rank servant, so she was a rank lower than Lian Xiao. Moreover, Lian Xiao was customarily forceful and bold in her manner, So even if Xu Xiang had been flawless and did everything impeccably, she would still be somewhat fearful of her. Xu Xiang came forward obediently, knelt and opened the food basket. Di Shui Bu Lu, lit. Not one drop of water can leak out. Fig of someone who does things very carefully, impeccable, flawless. While carrying out these actions, Xu Xiang did not look up at Zhang Ruan, and thus missed Zhang Ruan's gesture to Lien Qiao. Xu Xiang was in the process of taking out the steamed buns when she felt someone grab her violently from behind and place a handkerchief over her nose and mouth. She was just about to yell when a pungent odor assailed her nose and everything in front of her went dark as she lost consciousness. Lien Qiao had worked in the rural residence for several years and was a lot more vigorous than common maidservants. She looked down at Xu Xiang, who had fallen to the ground, and said, "Miss, take off her outerwear," Zhang Ruan said. Lien Qiao swiftly removed Xu Xiang's outerwear and handed it to Zhang Ruan, who draped it around herself and stood up. "Are we going to leave Xu Xiang here like this?" In the end, Lien Qiao proved to be soft-hearted. "If the Xia family has not cooked up any scheme, she is merely going to take my place in sleeping here for one night," Zhang Ruan said coldly. "If they have other intentions, Xu Xiang also belongs to Xia Yan, so let them sort out their internal strife." Lien Qiao thought this over, then said, "That's true. The Xia family is so evil, even making Miss kneel by herself in this kind of place overnight, with the clear intention of debilitating Miss through serious illness. Such poisonous minds." She looked at Xu Xiang, then continued, "That this Xu Xiang should take the place of Miss to kneel in the ancestral hall overnight is not considered excessive in comparison to all that she has tried to do against Mississippi. It's a good thing that Miss instructed this servant earlier on to get a sleeping drug from the herbal medicine shop and keep it on her person in case of emergencies. So convenient." Zhang Ruan smiled a little. If the Xia family simply wanted her to fall ill from the cold weather, then of course Xu Xiang would emerge unscathed. Unfortunately, the Xia family would probably not think this way. She glanced at the green smoke emitting from the incense burner. "Let's go to your room." In the night, one could only see two people dressed as maidservants walking out of the ancestral hall. One maidservant's voice was sharp and clear as she said, angrily, "Our Miss is really too pitiful, having to kneel like this in the ancestral hall overnight. She will definitely harm her body. Xu Xiang, you feel the same way, don't you?" The other maidservant made a noise of assent. It was hard to see clearly in the dimness of night. As if someone had walked away, a rustling sound came from the forest surrounding the ancestral hall. In another room in the xiafu, a veiled Jiang Susu took a sip of tea and said to the young man before her, "Biaoge, you have thought through it already. My eldest sister is one of the most beautiful ladies, and I think such a good person is extremely suitable for Biaoge. I'm just trying to give you both a helping hand." Biao Ji, older male cousin from the maternal line. Xia Jun looked at her. Although his expression was amorous, there was also a touch of arrogance as he said, "Keep your schemes to yourself. Do you really think that I don't know about your intentions?" On hearing this, annoyance flashed in Jiang Susu's eyes. "Biaoge, do you agree with this matter or not?" The person Jiang Susu most feared in the Xia family was this young man, Xia Jun. Although he was quite young, he lived a wholly licentious lifestyle, and had long since been acquainted with the relations between men and women. What's more, he was always rather somber. Jiang Susu had once hidden in Xia Jun's room, thinking to play with him, but she had unexpectedly witnessed him having his way with his personal maidservant in a brutal manner. The maidservant screamed repeatedly, and Jiang Susu, hiding under the bed, heard all this with fear and alarm. From then on, she was even more frightened of this cousin. Moreover, Xia Jun never treated her tenderly or gave her a sense of security, as most men did. He had always mocked and ridiculed her. "Why should I agree to run this errand for you?" Xia Jun bit back. Jiang Susu clenched her fists, calmed herself down and said, "If Biaoge wants to miss this opportunity, then I can only feel pity for you. Suer knows that Biaoge has always appreciated women with special talent and extraordinary character, and this elder sister of mine is truly 1 in 100. In a few years' time, who knows which family father will promise her to, but given her appearance and temperament, it is bound to be a rich noble family. If Biaoge does not want to seize this opportunity, it will be too late for regrets later." She gave a slight smile and continued, "Why not think about it thoroughly?" Xia Jun's eyes were hooded as he recalled the red-clad young girl from earlier, who acted with an appropriate sense of propriety, but who also seemed to be fundamentally cold and detached. This gave rise to an involuntary urge to conquer her, to see if the flesh wrapped under those red clothes was as delicious as her appearance. He said hoarsely, "What are you thinking of doing?" Jiang Susu replied, "De Jejie is kneeling in prayer overnight in the ancestral hall. Why doesn't Biaoga go over to keep her company? In this way, De Jejie will look upon Biaoga in a favorable light. Perhaps there will be some kind of tacit approval." Xia Jun observed Jiang Susu and abruptly laughed. "Many thanks for the instructions, Biaomei." Having said this, he stood up. "Biaomei should also rest early. We'll meet tomorrow." Biaomei, younger female cousin from the maternal line. After Xia Jun had left, Jiang Susu sat at the table and pulled down her veil. Stroking the ugly scar on her pale skin, she murmured, "Zhang Ruan, doing something so criminally despicable with another person in a place like the ancestral hall. Tomorrow morning, I want to see how you cover up the truth." Hu Dai's heart jumped. She said, "Miss, have you discussed this with Foreign? Why doesn't this servant go and ask her?" "Shut your mouth," Jiang Susu said in reprimand. "Mother always says she will exact revenge for me, but she has never succeeded. This time I will do it myself." Outside, Xia Jun walked in the direction of the ancestral hall. Xiao Si, who was walking beside him, asked cautiously, "Young master really wants to go to the ancestral hall to comfort Miss Jiang? There is something strange about second Mrs. words. I am afraid it is not that simple." "Of course it's not that simple." The corners of Xia Jun's mouth lifted up. "I know exactly what is going on in Jiang Susu's mind, but surprisingly it is not a bad idea. I will comfort eldest Jiang Miss well." The doors of the ancestral hall creaked open. It was already late at night, and the rain had gotten steadily heavier. With the moon hiding behind the dark clouds, the ancestral hall was in total darkness. Only the incense burner on the table gave off a few sparks, while the green smoke rose in spirals. The exotic fragrance was unlike any ordinary fragrance. Having been lit for a long time, the air in the hall was heavy with the fragrance. The minute Xia Jun walked in and smelled the fragrance, his body flushed, his palms were dry, and he unconsciously licked his lips. He slowly moved inwards, groping around, until he stumbled over a body under his feet. He froze, then crouched down to feel around and touched the warm, sweet-smelling body. He shook it gently, but it did not move, as if the person had lost consciousness. He pondered for a moment, then suddenly broke into laughter. The fire in his body was becoming increasingly intense. Xia Jun undid two of his buttons, then took the liberty to reach out and grope the body in his arms. The room echoed with the sound of rendering silk. Chapter 71. 1. Chapter 71. 1. The pitter-patter of the drizzle went on for a whole night. As dawn broke, the official residence was shrouded amidst a misty rain. The black clouds hung heavily in the low altitude, as if they were about to destroy the entire city. The twigs and branches in the courtyard had become greener after going through the scourge of the night's rainfall, and it was evident that they had become verdant, glistening and replete with moisture. There was a chill in the spring air, and the maidservant that had gotten up early could not help but shiver as she pushed open the windows with a smile. "Miss, it is almost time." The person nestled in the blanket only shot out an arm. Looking at that pure white and perfect arm, it was tender and adorable. As one's gaze swept upwards from that arm, one could precisely see an incomparably clear and attractive complexion. However, when she tossed over and revealed her other side profile, there was a long scar that was quite ugly and fierce, as if a large centipede had crawled onto it. The look on the maidservant's face was faintly startled, while Jiang Susu had already begun speaking by questioning, "Dawn has arrived this quickly?" She laughed lightly as half of that ugly countenance immediately revealed a strange smile. "I really can't wait to see this good show." Hu Dai had found a pure white blouse with detailed, golden embroidered water caltrops on its V-neck collar and tiny, hidden patterns on its blouse. The long skirt that almost touched the floor had a light yellow embroidery of a rounded design filled with scattered flower blossoms. Draped over her body, the coat had a discreet lotus pattern that was embroidered on the damask silk. With such quiet and light coloring, it contrasted with her looks, making her look exceptionally lucid and elegant. All of this set her apart except for that blemished face. A streak of hatred flashed through Jiang Susu's eye as Qing Ting handed over the white muslin veil to her. Jiang Susu put on the veil over her head properly, and only after this did she act to push the door. "Let us go." The Marquis Xiaofu was one fold bigger than the Jiangfu, and its garden had been renovated in an extremely refined manner too. In all aspects, the Xiaofu thoroughly exhibited the owner's noble position. The ancestral hall was in the last room at the very end of the garden's hallways. From its exterior, it looked rather tastefully and thoughtfully planned out. If one was in the garden, they would immediately be able to see it at a glance. In the early spring, there were still some decomposing remnants of the flourishing plum flowers left on the plum tree's branches. Although the weather had been constantly overcast and rainy, with such an appearance on the contrary, it still had a special charm to it. A few figures appeared in the garden. They were headed by a person dressed in fluttering white clothes whose figure was long and slender. To the side of that person was someone whose body build was slightly plump. An amiable smile graced their face. Also, around these few people, there were still two more figures. One was in black brocade clothes and the other was in a magnificently brocaded garment. Amidst the foggy mist, one could not see their appearances clearly at all. Presently Jiang Susu was walking with Hu Dai in the direction of the hall. During this journey, she had to pass by the garden. By chance, she met with a group of people that were walking towards her from the opposite direction. She saw Xia Cheng and from afar greeted him, maternal grandfather. Xia Cheng's complexion stiffened as the male in the brocaded clothes beside him immediately spoke up. "So as it turns out, it's Second Mississippi." Jiang Susu was startled, as by now those people had come closer and she could clearly see their appearances. She could not help but feel great alarm in her heart because among the three remaining people she had yet to greet, there was one person that she did not recognize. As for the other two, they were Xian Li and Xiao Xiao. At the edge of his lips, Xian Li had a cultured, refined smiling comportment as he looked at her with a smile. Showered with a glance from that pair of gentle eyes, Jiang Susu's face, which had been covered by the veil, could not help but flush slightly. However, as she met the gaze of Xiao Xiao's clear and cold eyes, she could not help but feel the violent palpitations of her thumping heart. Xia Cheng had initially wanted to reprimand Jiang Susu, yet, after seeing the look on Xian Li's face, that very thought ceased. Recalling those words in Xia Yan's letter, his furrowed brows immediately unfolded as he smiled. "Suer, aren't you going to greet His Highness the Crown Prince, His Highness the 8th Prince and Wangye?" At first, Jiang Susu had many suspicions about the identity of the male in brocade clothes. After hearing what Xia Cheng said, she could not help but be alarmed. She did not expect that the other party could actually be the Crown Prince. Lifting her head, she took a look at the male in the center as she sized him up. She saw that the man had a youthful appearance of about 20 years old or so, while also inheriting the good appearances that were a part of the heavenly families, the royal family's lineage. Therefore, he could also be considered as handsome. Only, in comparison to Xiao Xiao and Xian Li's presence, he had fallen short by much more than the tiniest bit. In the eyes of the beholder, one could faintly see the fickleness and impatience that he tried to hide. Inwardly, Jiang Susu could not help but be somewhat disappointed, as she thought of some of the matters in the imperial court that Jiang Quan had occasionally told her about. That color of disappointment in her heart had gradually faded too. She then stepped forward and gave a curtsy. "Jiang family Sunyang greets His Highness, Crown Prince, Your Highness, 8th Prince and Wangye." The Crown Prince laughed out loud. "Bengong has heard about Second Jiang Miss National Grace and Divine Fragrance. Truly an outstanding beauty. Why have you concealed your face? Could it be that you are afraid of being eaten up by Bengong?" Hearing this, Jiang Susu jumped in fright as Xiao Cheng chuckled. "Your Highness, a few days ago, Suer was injured by a kitten that had scratched her face and it left a scar. In fear of it catching wind, she has covered it with a veil. We would like to ask Your Highness to show leniency." Jianfeng, a concept founded in traditional Chinese medicine. Wind is said to often carries environmental factors into the body, and wind causes disturbances, literally moving the pain from joint to joint. The characteristics of wind invading the body are sudden symptoms, pain that moves from one place to another, and, in some cases, paralysis. Here, they are afraid of her injury becoming worse and scabbing over because of the wind. The Crown Prince frowned. If it's thus, then it's rather a pity. Who knows which family's kitten would act in such a reckless manner and scratch second Jiang Mi's face. Many thanks to your highness' concern. Jiang Susu spoke softly. That kitten has already been caught and put to death. Then that is good. Bengong has always had tender, protective feelings for the fairer sex, and to know that second Jiang Mi's face was damaged by a kitten like this, one would also feel distressed. Jiang Susu lowered her head and seemed to have been bashfully taken aback. Her face was flushed red by this absurd speech. While she was talking to the Crown Prince, Xianli had been constantly smiling as he looked at her. That smile was like a fresh spring breeze, but upon a closer look, one would notice that it had yet to reach the depths of his eyes. That's right, maternal grandfather. Jiang Susu seemed to have suddenly thought of something as she continued. Dejie has been kneeling and praying for blessings in the ancestral hall since yesterday evening. I am not sure how she is doing right now. If the maidservants had forgotten to call her out of the hall, then it would be extremely serious. Now that it is still raining, the ancestral hall must be doubly gloomy and cold. To have kneeled for an entire evening, I'm afraid would be harmful for her body. It would be best that we go to see her now. With her deeply concerned expression and words that in all aspects seemed to be thinking in consideration of Zhang Ruan, she truly seemed like a generally good and kind-hearted younger sister. Xia Cheng was startled, and afterwards, something came to his mind. After hesitating for a moment, he then remarked, "There are guests present. It would be good enough to instruct some maidservants to do so. Maternal grandfather, Dejie is my elder sister. Naturally I would feel distressed for her." Jiang Susu earnestly replied, "Even if you told me to leave in such a way now, I would still be concerned. Moreover, these esteemed highnesses are all benevolent people and naturally will not mind these matters. Moreover, once His Highnesses sees Dejie's sincerity whilst kneeling for a whole night in the ancestral hall to ask for blessings for the Xiao family, would Dejie not be the pride of our Xiaofu?" Xia Cheng wanted to decline once more. Yet the Crown Prince seemed to be in high spirits as he commented, "Your eldest sister is the eldest Jiang Miss? That person who had danced astonishingly on Linglong boat? That is her." Jiang Susu's voice seemed normal, but the corner of her lips had stiffened under her veil. Then how opportune as Bengong had wanted to take a closer look at her. "Hearing you mention that she had kneeled in the ancestral hall for a night, this girl's sincere filial piety is indeed something rare. Bengong wishes to take a look as well." He spun around to look at Xianli and Xiao Xiao, eighth younger brother. Xiao, you won't disagree to this, right?" After saying this, he then laughed heartily as he looked at Xia Cheng, remarking, "Old Marquis Xia, please lead the way then." Inwardly, Xia Cheng felt helpless. However, His Highness, the Crown Prince, was exactly this sort of master that conducted himself insolently, and from the start, it was absolutely out of the question to reason with him. Thus, he simply glared at Jiang Susu as he gave a forceful feigned smile. "Then I'll be showing something unseemly to His Highness." Being glared at by Xia Cheng, Jiang Susu felt somewhat guilty. Still, after thinking about what would be happening soon, she could not resist feeling somewhat excited. She had initially not thought that she might bump into Xianli and Xiao Xiao in the Xiaofu today, and to even have the Crown Prince present. Now that these three people had come, this was the most opportune time to witness Zhang Ruan's wretched appearance. Once Zhang Ruan's unsightly appearance had been seen by foreign men, based on Jiang Quan's temper, he would definitely have Zhang Ruan drowned in a pool. In Jiang Susu's eyes, there was a flash of slight laughter. "Zhang Ruan, you will be bringing along a slutty, wretched reputation to your death." The ancestral hall was not far from the garden, and one could see only one young manservant guarding at the door at this moment. Seeing Xia Cheng and the other people coming behind him, he had been frightened until his legs were weak. Seeing this young manservant, who usually served beside Xia Jun, standing in front of the hall, Xia Cheng was at first stunned, but he soon understood. What kind of person was Xia Cheng to have obtained this position? At first, this was something that made people ponder over carefully. Becoming seasoned after many years in officialdom upon seeing Xia Jun's young manservant, he seemed to have guessed what would be happening very soon. With another look at Jiang Susu's gaze, there was not anything else that he could have mistaken this situation for. For Jiang Susu to want revenge on Jiang Ruan was fine, however, she could not drag his only grandson into this matter. If something really happened today, then Jiang Ruan would be ruined. Yet, if this matter about Xia Jun doing this sort of thing in the ancestral hall was spread outside, then would this not be a damage to her JSS's own reputation too? Were it not for the presence of outsiders currently, then he truly would be itching to slap Jiang Susu twice firmly on the face before letting the matter drop. He had at first thought that this granddaughter of his was intelligent, and with just her talent and appearance alone, she would be able to help the Xia family build up a connection. Now that he was truly seeing her before him, he found that she was yet another dunce with a short-sighted vision, truly stupid beyond belief. Xia Cheng had yet to think of a good way to lead these few people away when Jiang Susu suddenly cried out in alarm, "Aren't you a servant of Biaoge? Why are you here?" On hearing this, Xian Li and Xiao Xiao's eyes flashed faintly, and the two people looked towards the young manservant at the same time. Seeing Xia Cheng, the young manservant had already begun to uncontrollable shake in his heart. With how long his own young master took and had yet to appear, and now that the Lord had come, he unclearly stammered, This servant. Jiang Susu frowned and did not wait for him to finish his words. Without consulting anyone, she stepped forward to push open the door. "You are behaving very strangely. It couldn't be that something has happened to Dejie, right?" Immediately after the doors of the ancestral hall had been opened, a burst of thought-provoking fragrance assailed everyone's senses. The air was filled with an indescribable rare fragrance, and as one inhaled it in, one felt a sort of drying sensation at the throat. Apart from this, there was a sort of fishy smell that made one feel disgusted. As Jiang Susu stepped forward a few steps, she suddenly let out a sound of "ah." Alarmed and frightened, she then hurried out of the door. She seemed to have suffered from a huge shock as her shoulders trembled at once. When she ran out, she just happened to bump into Xianli. He reached out to support her as Jiang Susu lay limply against him. Xianli gently called out, "Miss Jiang." In his arms, Jiang Susu then raised her head as her eyes were welling up in tears. Her entire body was shivering faintly. Dejie, she. Xia Cheng's heart sunk. The crown prince had already been stirred up entirely in curiosity by Jiang Susu's actions and directly strode across the ancestral hall's door. Having opened the doors of the ancestral hall a little wider, suddenly, the scene inside the ancestral hall fell before the eyes of the people at present. Yet it was an extremely alluring tableau. On the ground, there was a pair of a man and woman sentimentally intertwined and were maintaining themselves in such a becoming position. They were actually entirely naked from tip to toe. The woman's long hair was messy and the man had drawn her into an embrace on his chest. Spots of murky dark red traces were on the female's body, and with her back facing everyone, it was very clear that the night before had been rather wild. Jiang Susu appeared to be extremely frightened, ashamed and embarrassed, and regardless, she had hidden her head into Xian Li's arms. Coolly, Xian Li's brows slightly frowned, yet he still reached out a hand to warmly pat her on the shoulders. In front of so many people present, Xia Cheng could no longer mask this situation, and at once, he yelled in anger, "Preposterous! To have done such a sordid and filthy thing in his own Fu's ancestral hall, and to even be seen by the finest esteemed and honorable nobility in this capital." Even if he did not feel any sense of embarrassment, he too could not help but feel like he had no prestige left. "Dejie, how could she have with Biaoge?" Jiang Susu spoke in doubt and fright as she hid in Xian Li's arms. "This is the ancestral hall." Xia Cheng ruthlessly stared at Jiang Susu now that his own plans had been entirely thrown into disorder. This granddaughter of his, she did not have the ability to do anything right, and yet had more than enough faults to bring about a disaster. Unfilial son. Unfilial son. Xia Cheng was infuriated as he angrily pointed at the man and woman in the ancestral hall. "To think that my Xiaofu has raised you for more than 10 years, and for you to actually not cherish one's good name like this. To have done such a filthy and sordid thing in the ancestral hall. Where has the sense of honor, propriety, justice and integrity that I have taught you gone to? To have no one teaching and becoming this uncultured. In the days ahead, how can the Xiaofu rely on you to bring honor to our family?" Repeating himself over and over again, he seemed to be finding fault with Xia Jun, But what he had implied inwardly and outwardly with his words were all about Zhang Ruan, who had no sense to cherish her own reputation and ridiculing her for having no mother to teach her and thus had this sort of wretched moral character. He had pinned all of the wrongdoings onto Zhang Ruan, as the ways of this world had always been particularly more harsh on women. Raising his head to survey the expressions of everyone present, Xiaocheng knew that Xianli would still aid the Xiaofu. However, he was unsure about Xiao Xiao and the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince was somewhat curious and rather teasingly remarked, "This is actually a first for Bengong to see such a spring scenery in an ancestral hall. Old Marquis Xiaofu has truly gone above and beyond. This is too amusing." While they had been speaking, the man and woman on the floor had yet to awaken. With a wholly unconcerned and careless posture whilst lying on the floor, the aforementioned gentleman, who was naked from head to toe, was taken into measure. Jiang Susu could not resist but remark, "De Jiejie appears to have lost consciousness. Why hasn't she awakened yet? Hu Dai, go and find a set of clothes for De Jiejie and have her brought back to the house." Accepting her orders, Hu Dai left, and Jiang Susu ignored Xiaocheng's knife-like gaze and murmured softly, "This matter, I hope that your highnesses will not spread this out. In any case, my elder sister is also a well-bred young lady from a prestigious family too. As for now, she has yet to marry. If this was found out, then her life would be ruined." These words were clearly spoken in consideration for Zhang Ruan, yet it also reminded everyone present that Zhang Ruan was a young girl that had yet to reach a marriageable age. However, at such a young age, she had already done such sordid acts. It truly was something that made one extremely disgusted with her. GG. This refers to a young girl's 15th birthday as in ancient China's customs. A young girl becomes a marriageable young lady at the age of 15, where they are conferred a coming-of-age ceremony where they will have someone of noble status and importance to help them put on a hairpin to signify their marriageable status. A fun fact: young ladies below the age of 15 aren't allowed to use pins at all. They can only use ribbons or have their hair let down. Chapter 71. 2. Chapter 71. 2. The expression on Xianli's face had been slightly perturbed still. He had yet to speak before he faintly heard a voice. "Second Zhang Miss has yet to see the female's face clearly. Thus how can you be truly certain that it is eldest Zhang Miss?" Stunned, Jiang Susu raised her head as Xiao Xiao's elegant, cold and cheerless side profile appeared right in front of her. Yet in his tone one could not discern any delight nor anger. On that day when he had helped her on the Linglong boat, at first, she had thought that Xiao Xiao was on her side. However, later on, once Jiang Susu went to Jining Wang's Fu, she had been given the cold shoulder numerous times at the doorstep. Therefore, she was rather uncertain about what this Jining Wang had been thinking at the time. Now that she heard these words that seemed to be aiding Zhang Ruan, this made Jiang Susu become even more suspicious. Then, right at this moment, she heard a soft and gentle voice come from behind her. "Everyone, what could all of you present be looking for?" Hearing this voice at that very instant, it was as if a bolt of lightning flashed across a clear sky in Jiang Susu's head, her entire body stiffening in the place that she stood. Xiao Xiao raised an eyebrow slightly as his gaze moved towards the direction of that voice. He turned only to see a young girl with black tresses and red clothes draped in the morning's clear dew on her shoulders. She was standing just amongst the cluster of flowers a few steps outside as she looked towards them with a smile on her features. She had yet to open her umbrella and the fluttering drizzle of rain had fallen gently on her body. One could see at present, in the midst of that pair of upturned charming eyes, there was merely indifference. Upon seeing that slight smile at the edge of her lips, one could not help but feel apprehensive. De Jiejie? Jiang Susu retreated 2 steps back. Unhurriedly, Zhang Ruan stepped forward. "So it is actually second younger sister. I'm unclear as to why you have come this early in the morning to the ancestral hall. Was there something the matter?" With every step she took forward, Jiang Susu took a step back as what remained in her eyes was alarm. Swallowing down with much difficulty the questions she had that were about to burst forth from her own mouth, she then replied, "De Jiejie, why are you here? Then in the hall, who could that be?" Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. "Oh, the person in the hall, that is one of my dedicated maidservants. At around midnight last night, she saw that my body was unable to endure, and so volunteered to help me kneel for the rest of the night. Maternal grandmother said that it must be someone who was born in the 4th month of the lunar calendar to pray for blessings. By lucky coincidence, this devoted maidservant of mine was also born on the 4th month of the lunar calendar. With an unfazed expression, she lied smoothly, and once finished, her expression became slightly astonished. Why, has something happened? Xiaocheng knew that Zhang Ruan was certainly spouting nonsense, and it may be assumed that she had already known about Zhang Susu's plan from the beginning. He then gloomily glared at her as he slowly said, "There are people who have done illicit actions in the ancestral hall. I think that between them, one of them is your maidservant." Zhang Ruan gaped as she shook her head. "This maidservant of mine is definitely a pure and innocent young lady. Usually, she minds her own deeds and keeps out of trouble, and is honest to a fault. It is most unlikely for her to have done such an immoral thing. In all likelihood, someone must have compelled her. Even if she is just a maidservant on her behalf, I still want to ask for justice." "Dejejia, why do you say such a thing? It is obvious that the maidservant by your side is the one whose moral conduct is improper. How could this be blamed on someone else?" Zhang Susu questioned. If the maidservant beside them had improper moral conduct, then it would be inevitable that people would have some doubts about their master as well. Why would second younger sister speak of such? Zhang Ruan smiled. "This maidservant was one personally chosen by mother herself for me. How could you harbor suspicions over mother's judgment of character? Could it be that mother had found such a person with immoral conduct to be by my side on purpose?" Zhang Susu was at loss for words, and in a split second, she harbored a thread of malicious hatred in her heart towards Zhang Ruan. Xiaocheng narrowed his eyes slightly. Even before having the chance to say anything, he had already seen Zhang Ruan abruptly kneel before the crown prince, even though because of this matter it seems as though Ruanyang's maidservant will have to suffer some hardships. But after deep thought, she has still helped Ruanyang bear some unexpected misfortune. If this were Ruanyang last night, now Ruanyang could only demonstrate her sincerity by dying. This villain is truly deplorable. Your Highness the Crown Prince would surely be able to see clearly even the downy feathers of autumn, perceptive of even the finest detail. Ruanyang beseeches His Highness to investigate this matter thoroughly, and punish the hoodlum who is pretending to be an innocent person. With her kneeling as such, Xiaocheng's temple was faintly throbbing as he could only complain in his heart about this ill predicament. When Zhang Ruan had arrived, she did not know who this man in front of her was. Yet, this crown prince had remained stubbornly contrary since birth. This man was temperamental, and one could barely perceive with any certainty his preferences. One could not say for sure that he would be really interested in this matter for any length of time, nor could one know if he would decide to punish Xiaojun. Xianli glanced at Zhang Ruan's actions as a glimmer of radiance shot through his eyes. Yet, Xiao Xiao stood quietly and watched with an unclear expression in his eyes. Full of spirits, the crown prince looked at her. "You are the eldest Zhang miss." Zhang Ruan smiled as she looked at him. "I greet His Highness the Crown Prince." As expected. A charming beauty that is after one's heart. The Crown Prince followed suit and smiled. "You want Bendian to take charge of this on your behalf." Bendian. It literally means this palace hall, but often it refers to a royalty, who owns their own palace, which in and of itself signifies immense status and power, referring to themselves. Once Xiaocheng heard this, naturally, he became endlessly anxious as he looked towards Xianli with a hurried appeal for help. Then suddenly, just at this moment, a maidservant hastily ran forward before him. "Master, it's terrible, Furen has fainted." "What?" Xiaocheng was in great alarm as he turned back to take a glance at the ancestral hall. "Have someone sent out quickly. Get them to call for the physician." After saying this, he gave a bow to the crown prince and his other guests. "My wife has suddenly fainted. These matters in the ancestral hall can be discussed again more later. I request your highness to please extend your judgment a little longer." "No matter," the crown prince laughed. "This show today is truly wonderful. Now we will go together with old Marquis Xia to have a look." Saying this, he then walked to Xiaocheng's side. Xiaocheng had stiffened as he moved his feet towards the center hall. Zhang Susu promptly followed behind while Xianli smiled slightly as he went along and left too. Yet Zhang Ruan and Xiao Xiao remained behind. Expressionless, Zhang Ruan took a glance at Xiao Xiao as she moved her body sideways to walk forward. She then heard Xiao Xiao's voice from above her. How did you know that he was the crown prince? When Zhang Ruan had arrived, no one had told her who the crown prince was. Yet, when she had knelt down, she had called out extremely clearly His Highness the Crown Prince. It really was something that made one suspicious of her. Zhang Ruan was startled and inwardly rebuked herself for being careless, to have actually allowed this person to have a handle on her in his hands. Her thoughts abruptly spun for a moment as she looked directly at that elegant, heroically handsome appearance of Xiao Xiao and coldly replied, "The bearing between a dragon and a bug is naturally different. For example, the crown prince has the bearing of a crown prince." She suddenly showed a bright smile on her face with a sincere tone. As for scum, they too would have a scum-like radiance. After saying this with light footsteps, without looking at Xiao Xiao's expression and without his leave, Zhang Ruan left. Once she reached the large hall, as expected, she saw a bunch of maidservants and old female servants surrounding her as the eldest wife of the young master, and the second wife of the young master of the Xia family stood to the side. In the middle of this whole situation was a small collapsed figure. Xia Furen's eyes were tightly shut with a wan face as a trickle of fresh and dark blood came from the corner of her mouth. Seeing this, Xia Cheng immediately hastened his pace forward as he lamentably grieved. Furen! Shun Rou and Yuya were standing at her sides as they looked upon Xia Furen rather fretfully. From their mouths, the words were repeatedly uttered, "Mother! Maternal grandmother, what has happened to you?" spoken in a respectful tone. Jiang Susu pushed away everyone as she walked to Xia Furen's side with her eyes immediately spilling over with 2 trails of tears. If she was to be taken seriously, she was extremely worried. Jiang Chao stood aside and spoke in a gloomy tone. "Maternal grandmother has only become like this just after eating that box of pastries." Astonished, Jiang Susu looked at that pastry and then looked at Zhang Ruan. "Aren't those the ones that Dejie gave to maternal grandmother?" Zhang Ruan remained unfazed with a light smile on her face. She did not make any justifications for herself at all. Yet, Zhang Li seemed to be wishing for the whole world to be in chaos as she cried out, "How could maternal grandmother become like this after eating Dejie's pastries? Could it be that there was something wrong with the pastries?" Xia Jiao Jiao had initially stood at Shun Rou's side with her gaze appearing like she was somewhat at her wit's end. Thus at this moment, once she heard Zhang Li and Jiang Susu's words, she seemed to have thought of something as she remarked, "What a great person you are, Zhang Ruan. My Xiaofu has treated you with sincerity. How could you have poisoned my paternal grandmother like this?" "I fear that Biaojie has spoken ill," Zhang Ruan flatly replied. "This box of pastries was not prepared by Ruan Yang. It was mother who helped Ruan Yang to prepare." "Ruaner, what are you saying?" Xia Yan looked at her with a gaze filled with disappointment. "How is it possible that I would cause harm to myself and poison my own mother? Ruaner, you are unaware of the rules in the Fu and had forgotten to prepare a visitation present for your maternal grandparents. So, I thoughtfully helped you to prepare one on your behalf. Now that you have made false charges against me like this, when all is said and done, what have I truly done wrong?" Upon hearing this, now it seemed like Zhang Ruan was intentionally framing Xia Yan. Zhang Ruan smiled slightly. "However, those pastries, they were prepared for me by mother, right?" "Biaomei, these words of yours are wrong," Xia Jiao Jiao replied. "Even if they were prepared on your behalf by paternal aunt, this does not ensure that you might not have added some poison to the gift box. For you to harm paternal grandmother and to think of framing paternal aunt, this is truly your true colors, right?" Yuya frowned. "If indeed, is it truly so?" Zhang Ruan sighed. "Since everyone has already said the reason this clearly, is there still a need for Ruan Yang to say anything then?" Yet, right at this moment, one could see a physician carrying a medical box on his back as he hurriedly came in. He had not bothered with anything else as he helped Xia Furen to check her pulse. After he gave a long sigh, he said, "I will first give a prescription. Hurry. Go to an apothecary to boil some for Furen to consume at once." Some old female servants had lifted Xia Furen into the inner room as Xia Cheng ordered some servants to get the herbal prescription without delay. He then stepped forward. "May I venture to ask this physician, how is my wife's condition?" Seeing this appearance of hers, about 80 to 90% is because she has ingested some poison. The physician touched his beard as he continued. "The good thing is that the ingested amount was rather little and is unlikely to go as far as to take her life." After these words had been said, there was a silence in the room. Suddenly a sharp voice resounded, "It's you. I'm sure that it was you who thought of harming my paternal grandmother, to have given her some poison. I beseech His Highness to pass judgment for my Xia family." Xia Jiao bowed her body low and her words were solemn and forceful as if they were truly justified. Jiang Susu was startled and then glanced at Xianli, who did not speak. With half of her face concealed behind a veil, she only revealed a lovely and pitiful set of eyes. At the moment, if anyone looked at her, they could not help but make one's heart melt. Even a person that seemed to be made of steel could not help but soften his attitude for her. Xianli took a mild glance at her, and then looked at the young girl clothed in red in the middle of the hall, whose expression remained unchanged. Even if there were a lot of people pointing out at her at this moment, her posture remained ramrod straight with a slight curl at her lips. It was as if she did not hear Xia Jiao's words. Zhang Ruan faintly smiled, and amidst everyone's wrathful gaze, she slowly walked forward and stood in front of that box of pastries. Reaching out, she broke off a small piece and moved in front of that physician. "Daifu, without a doubt, did Xia Foreign truly ingest poison?" "Daifu? Physician?" "Naturally," the physician replied without the slightest doubt. Zhang Ruan lightly sighed. "It truly makes one puzzled. Why is that for Xia Foreign to have ingested poison? It must definitely be Ruan Yang who has poisoned her. Wouldn't it be that Xia Foreign had ingested the poison by herself?" "A bunch of nonsense," Xia Chang indignantly flared. "Without rhyme or reason, why would my foreign ingest some poison? Demimi, you are still trying to quibble now. Maternal grandmother has definitely fainted because she ate your gift of pastries. Without exception, there is human testimony and material evidence present." Jiang Chao spoke in anger. "Damimi, eldest of the many younger sister. So," Zhang Ruan thought for a bit and then placed that piece in her hand. "Daifu, does this pastry have poison? What else do you have to say?" Xia Chang spat out. He then looked once more at the crown prince, who was standing to the side. "I beseech for His Highness to redress this matter on my foreign's behalf." Zuobi Shangguan. Similar to another Chinese phrase, it means to be a bystander and not bother to help. In the past, however, though it may apply to this current scenario as well, it means one stands at a rampart or at a barrier, while the two parties are fighting. The crown prince remained silent as he stared at Zhang Ruan as if he wanted to see what she would do. Then he saw Zhang Ruan nip off a piece of the pastry in her hand and shake her head. If this is truly the case, Ruan Yang truly has nothing to say. What is to be done? It seems it can only be to exchange one's life for another's. Then she lightly took a nibble of that pastry and unhurriedly swallowed it down. Everyone looked at her in shock as a trace of radiance flashed through Jiang Chao's eyes. In her heart, Jiang Susu had at once a burst of glee. Xiao Xiao observed that young girl's action of chewing and swallowing, and for some unknown reason, his heart had unexpectedly felt a shred of cold sweat for her. That physician had not expected that Zhang Ruan would be so brave. Just a moment had passed and Zhang Ruan had already eaten that piece of pastry. Yet nothing seemed to have happened. She blinked and Jiang Chao looked at her incredulously. In his heart, Xiao Xiao felt a sigh of relief as Xianli frowned. However, the crown prince burst out into laughter as he clapped his hands. "Amusing, truly extremely amusing." Jiang Susu and Xia Jiao were left dumbstruck as Xia Chang was blank on the spot. Suddenly he looked at the pastry on the table and then looked at Zhang Ruan. Shun Rou and Yu Ye's gazes were thoughtful as Zhang Ruan patted her hands and clapped the remaining fragments away. She then softly spoke. "So as it turns out, this poison is also able to distinguish between people. I and maternal grandmother had the same piece of pastry, so it ought to have the same identical poison. Maternal grandmother had only eaten a little but has since lost consciousness. Yet I have eaten an entire piece but remain unharmed. Indeed, there too is also a distinction between the nobility of a person's life. With such an identity like Ruan Yang's, even if it's poison, after eating a small amount, it is no bother to me too." These words of hers were witty and adorable. They seemed to contain a sort of implication of mocking herself. Yet, it was precisely that each sentence of hers was probing, and the provocative words exposed and criticized the thoughts and motives of the people around her. It had directly choked Xia Chang so much that he could not speak. Zhang Ruan then cast her head in the direction towards the crown prince with a glance and a sudden laugh. her voice gentle as she spoke. Your Highness, I respectfully and certainly request for you to seek redress for Ruan Yang. Chapter 72. 1. Chapter 72. 1. The tables seemed to have turned. When Xiaocheng saw that the situation was not good, he immediately responded to the physician angrily. Quack! How dare you lie to us? No, my lord. The physician took a few steps back. He didn't know what had gone wrong as everything was different from the expected scenario. All of a sudden, he broke out into a cold sweat. There's no need for old Marquisia to get angry. Perhaps, as eldest Zhang Miss said, this poison had no effect on her. Even though Xiaocheng had no idea what the crown prince meant, it sounded like random nonsense. Nevertheless, beads of cold sweat started to appear on Xiaocheng's back. No matter how muddle-headed and incompetent the crown prince was, having no talent and devoid of morals, he was after all a member of the royal family. How could he tolerate his subjects playing petty tricks before his very eyes? At this very moment, Xian Li's voice rang out. Since it's the quack's fault, just tie him up immediately. If they're kept, such quacks will only harm people's lives in the future. Then, he ordered his attendants to bind the physician. The physician didn't foresee this sudden misfortune and shouted. It's obviously old, however. Before he could finish speaking, he was gagged and pinned down. Jiang Susu glanced at Xian Li gratefully. However, a trace of fury crossed Jiang Li's face. Jiang Ruan smiled. Your Highness the Eighth Prince, why did you have the physician tied up? This way it's still unclear whether the pastry was poisonous or not, or whether Ruan Yang is guilty or innocent. She actually didn't give Xian Li a way out of this situation. On hearing her say this, Xian Li was disappointed. He thought that the Jiang family's eldest miss was a smart person. When a wise man encounters this kind of situation, he should not continue to look into it. Did she still think that the people here would grant her justice, especially as the Jiang family's unfavored daughter? It was better to settle the matter now, which would save a lot of trouble. Thinking along these lines, he glanced at Jiang Ruan. But he was stunned to see that Jiang Ruan was currently looking his way calmly. There was a kind of indescribable emotion in those beautiful eyes. He had seen that emotion many times. It was unforgettable. Hatred. Hatred. How could this Jiang family's eldest miss hate him for no reason? Because he spoke on behalf of the Xiao family? Xian Li paused and then took another look at Jiang Ruan, but she had already turned away. It was as if the emotions in her eyes were merely his illusion. But Xian Li knew for sure that it was not an illusion. The girl across from him did have an inexplicable hatred for him. Just then, an indifferent voice suddenly broke the silence. In that case, Yifeng, take my official seal and go to see the great physician Xiao. Everyone's eyes were immediately focused on him. Yet Xiao Xiao's expression remained unchanged as he continued. We'll bring the truth of this matter to light. Shaluashichu idiom. As the water recedes, the rocks appear / the truth comes to light. The Xia family couldn't help but ponder. Did this represent speaking on behalf of Jiang Ruan? It was strange that both Jining Wang and the Crown Prince came here suddenly today. The Jining Wang rescued Jiang Susu aboard the Linglong boat. How come he seemed to be an ally of Jiang Ruan now? Jiang Ruan herself was also baffled. Xiao Xiao suddenly helped her. What was his objective? Xia Jiao Jiao had been looking at Xiao Xiao either furtively or deliberately since the moment he came in. When she heard what Xiao Xiao had said, her pretty face turned pale. She bit her lower lip tightly, looking like she was about to cry. Xian Li glanced at Jiang Susu, who was covered with a veil. Her eyes misted over with tears that wouldn't fall. It was really pitiful. Looking at the other members of the Xia family, several daughter-in-laws had precisely the same expression as that of Xia Yan. They were panic-stricken, 3 points due to restlessness while 7 points were due to weakness. It was truly unbearable for them. Jiang Ruan, standing in the middle of the hall, had a completely different expression from them. Her face was wreathed in smiles while her gaze was cold and indifferent. Each movement was incomparably sharp. Unexpectedly, she wanted to put people to death cruelly. Xian Li finally started speaking. Brother Xiao, why should you trouble great physician Xiao? It seems to me that the truth in this matter has been revealed. It's only harm caused by the quack. He misdiagnosed Xia Foreign's illness. The pastries on the table are not poisoned, and eldest Jiang Miss is also innocent. In the end, it was just a misunderstanding. You're all one family. Our emperor father has taught us from an early age that if the family lives in harmony, all affairs will prosper. His words were really fortuitous. Jiang Ruan sneered inwardly. If the family lived in harmony, all affairs would prosper. But whose family was harmonious and whose affairs were prosperous? It had nothing to do with her. With Xian Li's words, Xia Cheng breathed a sigh of relief. Next he gave a meaningful glance to Xia Yan, who was momentarily taken by surprise. She then walked up to Jiang Ruan and said, "Ruaner, it's my fault. If mother had been more careful, and not misled by the quack's words, you wouldn't have had to suffer this injustice. Now, mother can only ask for your forgiveness by getting down on my knees." With that, she bent down and knelt down to Jiang Ruan. Jiang Ruan moved aside slightly to avoid Xia Yan's grand ceremonial gesture, and spoke with a smile. Mother is joking. If she accepted Xia Yan's kowtow today, the reputation of disrespecting her father's wife would spread out in the capital city tomorrow. She looked at Xia Cheng. Everyone here is one family. If the family lives in harmony, all affairs will prosper. His Highness 8th Prince spoke really well. I had no idea. It's as if 8th Prince is a member of the Xiao family. Xian Li's expression turned stiff. Jiang Ruan spoke again. But it's a small matter for Ruan Yang to suffer a little grievance. On the other hand, maternal grandmother's illness is a big matter. For no apparent reason, how could she lose consciousness after eating a piece of Ruan Yang's pastry? It's really strange when you think about it. It's so strange that everything is still unresolved after much deliberation. She stood in the hall in the same posture and her face was wreathed with smiles. But today I would like to thank Wang Ye Xiao for speaking out and giving clarification on behalf of Ruan Yang. Otherwise, the quack would be at large and perhaps Ruan Yang would have to go to prison. The crime of plotting to murder maternal grandmother is not small. Ruan Yang couldn't bear it even if I wanted to risk my life. In fact, this matter had nothing to do with Xiao Xiao. It's just that in the roomful of people, she highlighted that only Xiao Xiao spoke fairly, which was like slapping everyone in the face. The crown prince suddenly laughed. Eldest Jiang Miss is right. I too feel that this matter wouldn't happen without any reason. In the imperial court, misjudgments and wrong verdicts also come at a price. From what I see, the young lady of Xia family, 2 daughter-in-laws, Jiang Foreign, as well as Jiang family's second miss and second young master, all denounced eldest Jiang Miss. Old Marquis Xia is advanced in age, so I'll let it pass. The rest won't be spared. Since eldest Jiang Miss wanted me to make the decision for her, I will do this one thing. Since you have all accused her wrongly, let's have each one of you take 20 lashings as corporal punishment. What? Xia Jiao cried out. Your Highness, how can you do this? Shunro pinched her arm in a hurry and spoke in dismay. This child is not sensible and only babbling nonsense. Your Highness, please spare her this time. There's no harm, the crown prince laughed heartily. Bengong is always benevolent. Go ahead. I am here to watch you all receive the corporal punishment. Xia Yan was stupefied while Zhang Chao and Zhang Su stared blankly for a while. Xia Cheng got so angry that the flesh on his cheeks trembled slightly. The crown prince's move was like slapping him in the face. He had gone so far as to make all of the Xia family's womenfolk lie on the stools to be flogged, including the young girls who had not married out yet. Your Highness, Xia Cheng still wanted to plead. Wang Ye. Xia Jiao fell on her knees in front of Xiao Xiao. You are kind and generous. Since you have just helped Biaomei, please intercede for us and ask the crown prince for mercy. Please help us. Zhang Ruan watched her action. In the past, when she was in the palace, Xia Jiao always appeared tyrannical. She had never seen her in such a mess before. After all, it's said that a dog threatens others based on its master's power. Before everyone's eyes, Xiao Xiao took a step back slowly. His elegantly handsome face remained unmoved, as cold as before. He spoke in an indifferent manner. What does it have to do with me? It was pure disdain. He actually showed no pity and tenderness toward the fairer sex at all. Xia Jiao turned stiff at his words. Her body started to shiver. She looked at Xiao Xiao full of anguish and helplessness. It's a pity that the waterside flower sheds petals for love, while the heartless brook babbles on. She shed her tears in vain. Luhui Wai, Eliashwaking, idiom lit. The falling flowers are yearning for love, but the heartless brook ripples on. Fig. One side is willing, yet the other one remains indifferent, usually of unrequited love. Are you questioning my decision? The crown prince was displeased. Xia Jiao was startled. Jiang Su cast a pleading glance at Xian Li, but he looked at her apologetically. In a scenario like this, he couldn't overtly challenge the crown prince. Jiang Su gritted her teeth. It's my fault. Su voluntarily accepts the punishment and asks Jie for forgiveness. After speaking, and without looking at the crowd, she walked straight towards the courtyard. The crown prince waved his hand. Set up the stool. Bengong will see them receive the punishment in person. Jiang Chao and Xia Yin looked at each other. They could only grit their teeth and follow towards the courtyard. Shen Rou and several others were very much unwilling in their hearts. However, seeing Xia Yin obediently step forward, they didn't dare to refuse. The young manservant in the courtyard soon found a stool and a wooden club to administer the punishment. The ones tasked for it were the Xia family's own old female servants. Originally, they wanted to show mercy, but the crown prince declared, if Bengong sees anyone not doing the task according to the public duty, immediately, they will be dragged out and chopped up to feed the dogs. Upon hearing this, the servants promptly dispelled that idea from their minds. Xia Chang was angry and distressed. Watching his children and grandchildren being punished in the courtyard, his heart was filled with resentment. All these years, his life was smooth sailing. He didn't expect that by framing a little girl today they would suffer such a great humiliation. The crown prince stood in the courtyard watching lazily. The old female servants were fat and strong. They struck without mercy. Those on the scene were all delicate-skinned and fair-complexioned daughters of a noble family. They had never received such a heavy punishment. Soon, their cries of utter anguish and continuous shrieks were resounding in the courtyard. Jiang Su laid on a stool with unbearable pain on her behind. She was more incensed about the humiliation than the pain. In front of Zhang Ruan and these royal princes in Wangya, she had no prestige left. Like a dead pig, she was tied to the stool and tortured. Right then she made an oath. If this hatred was not avenged, she vowed, she's not human. Zhang Ruan stepped out slowly from the crowd and watched Xia Yan's punishment. Was it painful? The agony they had inflicted on her was 100, even 1,000 times worse than that. There was no one to offer help nor plead for her when she painfully struggled at death's door. Xia family, this pain was just the beginning. Xianli walked up to her and asked, Eldest Zhang miss, don't you think they're pitiful? Those who are pitiful must have something hateful about them. Zhang Ruan smiled. Besides, the order is from His Highness the Crown Prince. Ruan Yang is powerless. Xianli choked. It was almost within reach, but for some unknown reason, there was a weird feeling inside his heart. The Zhang family's eldest daughter before him had never shown even an ounce of fear in the face of all kinds of situations today. It seemed that from the beginning till now, she had maintained a gentle and proper smile. At such a young age, either she was extremely cunning or she had foreseen all the possibilities that might happen today. Was it all within her grasp? Xianli immediately negated this idea. A myriad of things in the world were constantly changing. How could anyone control everything? He looked again at the smiling Zhang Ruan and doubted his guess just now. Zhang Ruan looked at what was happening in front of her calmly. Yesterday, she had ordered Lian Xiao to replace that box of pastries. She naturally understood what Xia Yin had intended. Moreover, the crown prince suddenly paying a visit to old Marquis Xia's food today was also her handling. The crown prince had a subordinate who usually pretended to be a storyteller at the Dongfeng Lu. She had heard Xianli mention it in her last life. When Xia Yin came to inform her about going to Marquis Xia's Fu, Zhang Ruan told Lu Zhu to go to Dongfeng Lu, pretending to be Xia Fu's servant girl, and mention it inadvertently. The relationship between Xianli and Xia Chang was a bit subtle. This matter was viewed as very sensitive among the princes. Once the news that Xianli was paying a visit to Xia Chang was leaked, His Highness the Crown Prince would naturally come to the Xiafu to join him. However, she didn't foresee Xiao Xiao's coming. As for the current crown prince, she had heard a lot about his conduct in her last life inside the palace. The crown prince had no political insight, moreover. His mind was not very deep. Early on, the emperor wanted to change the crown prince, but his plan failed due to Xiao Xiao's obstruction. Everyone thought that the crown prince was unfavored, but it was this unfavored prince who remained at the end when all the other princes in the palace were disposed of one after another by Xian Li. It remained unknown whether the emperor had anything to do with it. The crown prince's main trait was actually considered to be his biggest shortcoming: his simple-mindedness. Similar to Zhang Ruan, the crown prince was a part of the royal family and found himself to be unfavored in front of everyone. He was supposed to have a profound mind, but in fact he was rather simple-minded and emotional. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.